Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. All right, you may call your first witness. Actually, your second witness.
The defense would like to call the plaintiff, state of Wisconsin, to the stand. Are you aware that the state of Wisconsin is an entity and cannot claim to be an injured party in this matter?
Where's the injured party? Is the injured party present in court right now? Can anyone make a claim against me? Can you make a claim against me, Your Honor? Do you know of anyone that can make a claim against me, Your Honor? Can anyone right now in court, anyone, make a claim against me? I move for this case to be dismissed for failure to appear by the plaintiff and failure to state a claim for which relief can be granted. Under the Sixth Amendment, I have the right to face my accuser, which is the plaintiff of the case. So how could the subpoena not be filed, and how could the plaintiff not be called to the witness stand? That begs the question of, does the plaintiff even exist?
Warning: this video contains sensitive topics, and while it is factually based, it is interlaced with opinions that are entirely my own. I am not a lawyer, nor am I a psychologist, and my statements are speculative and meant only as commentary. Please enjoy the video. Darrell Edwards Brooks Jr. was born on February 21, 1982, to Dawn Lynette Woods and Darrell Edward Brooks Sr. He was one of a set of fraternal twins, paired with a sister named Ebony Danielle. It's believed that Darrell was born in Detroit, Michigan, but upon becoming a single mother, Dawn moved with her children to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Growing up in two of the poorest neighborhoods in the country certainly made its impact on Darrell. Brooks claimed that he began struggling with his mental health around 11 years old, after the death of his grandmother. Brooks was hospitalized briefly for bipolar disorder at the age of 12 and was placed on medication for his condition. He attended Riverside High School, but dropped out in the 11th grade, obtaining his GED sometime after. They say idle hands are the devil's playthings, and this proverb seemed to be proven by Darrell. He was arrested at only 17 years old for battery with intent to inflict substantial bodily harm. He pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 6 months in the House of Corrections and 3 years probation. Side note: a no contest plea is essentially admitting that there is enough evidence to find you guilty, so you're accepting conviction but maintaining a not guilty plea to avoid civil liability in some cases. The following year, Darrell was arrested on a similar charge, and while he was sentenced to prison, it was subsequently revoked. Brooks was forced to serve the full sentence, however, after he violated the conditions of his probation. It didn't take long for Brooks to be arrested again, this time for possession of THC while on probation. He was sentenced to 50 days in jail. It was around this time Darrell began casually dating a woman named Angel Fitzpatrick. Angel became pregnant, and when she was only a few months along, Brooks was arrested for resisting an officer. He was sentenced to serve 20 days, allowing him to be present in May when his first child, Xavier, was born. It appears that he did not stick around long, though, abandoning his son after roughly 3 months. On Darrell's 23rd birthday, he was arrested again for resisting, this time in Manitowoc County. After his arrest, Brooks was released on $300 signature bond, but he did not appear to the respective hearing. A bench warrant was issued, but Darrell Brooks was no longer in Wisconsin. he had already taken off to Nevada. Darrell Brooks Sr. was a resident of Nevada as well, and he was well known to the local police. But it's not certain whether the father and son were in touch during their overlapping residences in Reno and neighboring Sparks. Some confusion and controversy surrounds circumstances under which Darrell met Erica Patterson, the mother of his second child. It is a fact, however, that he pled guilty in November of 2006 to statutory sexual seduction when he impregnated the 15-year-old. For this crime, Brooks was released on bail and once again failed to show up for his hearing. Another bench warrant was issued. The following month, he was arrested for domestic battery and resisting an officer. He received a suspended sentence for the battery charge, but was required to serve a year and a half in Northern Nevada Correctional Center in Carson City for the other counts. During his incarceration, he participated in a documentary called Crystal Darkness, which followed the stories of recovering methamphetamine addicts.
I didn't think about, I got this beautiful kid who's going without my time. I thought I would just be this wonderful father, just be the greatest dad ever. The vision is just like, I'm gonna give him everything that I didn't have. But then it's like reality set in. You actually become the drug, not even a human being. Basically, that's how I felt. Like I wasn't a human anymore. I was just something vile, disgusting, despicable. I could go on. I could use a lot of words, but that's what I became. It's really what I became. What you're doing when you enter this life is basically you're signing a contract. It's very fine line. You're past that now. Now you're druggy. Oh man, if I was 15 again, if I was 15 and had most of the opportunities that these kids have now, I would probably be doing flips down this thing here.
In September 2008, Darrell Brooks was released and required to register as a sex offender, to which he failed to comply. Instead, he made his way to Sacramento, California, where he stayed with his aunt Valencia. Darrell returned to Wisconsin at some point. We know this because he was arrested in Woods County days after his 28th birthday for felony charges of strangulation and suffocation, as well as battery and criminal damage to property. Despite the severity of these charges, he was only sentenced to serve 90 days in jail and placed on 3 years probation, which he has proven at this point means absolutely nothing. 1 year later, Brooks was pulled over in Milwaukee and provided a false name. When the police officer asked him again to identify himself, Darrell placed his car into drive. The officer was so afraid that Brooks was going to run him over that he jumped into the vehicle with Brooks and wrestled for control of the vehicle as the car continued forward. Eventually, the cop was able to stop the vehicle and remove the keys, but Brooks had run off. He was later found hiding in a child's playhouse where authorities had to pepper spray him and taser him twice because he continually attempted to resist. Darrell was also found to be in possession of THC at the time of this arrest. Throughout 2011, Brooks was charged multiple times with resisting arrest, THC possession, and bail jumping, serving short stints in jail. He remained rather silent, settling with a woman named Jessica Macklin and having another child in 2014. His sister Ebony passed away due to an illness, yet Darrell managed to stay away from the police's attention. In 2016, Brooks was arrested for failure to obey the sex offender laws in Nevada. He was released on bail, to which he of course jumped, resulting in an additional charge. An arrest warrant was made, but Brooks had already fled the state. In 2020, he was staying with his mother when he got into an argument with his nephew over a cell phone. Brooks shot at the vehicle which his nephew was in and was arrested for the use of a dangerous weapon and possession of a stolen firearm. When he was searched, Darrell had a loaded Beretta in his possession. Initially, bail was set at $7,500, but it was dropped to just $500. Wisconsin is one of few states that require bail to be paid in full rather than a percentage. This significant decrease allowed Brooks to post bail and be released, and as usual, he ran from the state, convincing Erica that he wanted to work on their relationship and be involved in their daughter's life. Erica sent Darrell a plane ticket and flew him out to Georgia, where she was living. It didn't take long for him to change his attitude, though, and within weeks, he began abusing her. Darrell was arrested in Georgia in May of 2021 on charges of battery and domestic violence. He was released on bond and immediately fled to Wisconsin, taking Erica with him. He claimed that they would be visiting his mother, who Erica had never met, for only 2 weeks, but the couple had never returned once they were in Wisconsin. Yet again, Brooks' demeanor changed like before. His nephew Najee begged a judge to issue a no-contact order against his uncle upon learning that Darrell had returned. Dawn Woods had also sought a no-contact order against her son, but allowed him to stay with her regardless. On November 2nd, 2021, Darrell took his mother's 2010 red Ford Escape and drove it to American Inn, where Erica was staying. Banging on the door, Darrell yelled and cussed. Erica opened the door, pushing past Brooks in an attempt to escape his tirade, but he managed to snatch her phone and run off with it. Erica started walking to a gas station when Brooks pulled up alongside her and demanded that she get into the vehicle. When she refused, he punched her in the face. Erica began to run away, but Darrell pressed on the gas pedal, aiming to strike her with his vehicle. Darrell ran over her leg, breaking her ankle in several spots. Erica was treated at the same hospital that Darrell's mother worked at and was released to a women's shelter. When police located Darrell, he was sitting in the SUV in his mother's driveway, claiming to have a panic attack. He said that he was in need of his inhaler and made a dash towards his mother's house. Darrell was detained and charged with resisting, bail jumping, second-degree reckless endangerment with a sentence enhancer for domestic abuse, as well as battery and disorderly conduct. His bond was set at only $1,000, which his mother posted only 2 weeks later. As a result of Darrell's innumerable encounters with police, he portrayed a strong hate of authority, feeling that they were racist. Darrell was fond of recording himself talking about various topics, including his past and his political beliefs. In addition to a philosopher, Brooks fancied himself a rapper, penning lines about his tough childhood, criminal history, and distrust of authority. He used the monikers Math Boy Fly, J Fly, and Young Blast. Darrell gained quite a bit of popularity on several underground music sites like SoundCloud.
Hey, man. Once again, live and direct with the kid, man. Y'all see I'm in grind mode, man. I ain't shaved in about a month, man. You know what I'm saying? Working on this mixtape, man. Working on this website. It's the kid J Fly, man. You know what I'm saying? I just want to talk a little bit about that presidential address, man, from Obama, man. Crock of bullshit. I don't even know if it's ISIS or ISO anymore because he was switching it up a lot, man. But y'all trying to push us towards World War III. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Black people, Americans, don't be fooled by this good talking ass president, man. The nigga can sell water to a well, man. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, man, it's all bullshit. And we know what they doing, man. Real shit. Man, we living this shit, man. You see the Jag, man. You see the farm. Y'all see what it do, man. That's what we on, man. That's what we pulling up in, man. Fucking with.
And then as soon as we fall out, all of a sudden now I'm a pedophile. Let me explain that. 10 years ago, 2006, I caught a case with my oldest daughter's mama. Yes, my baby mama. She's from Oakland. I was busting moves in Nevada. I meet the bitch. She says she want to get down, so I'm pimping on the bitch. I'll take her to Nevada. You know what I'm saying? I get cracked. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know the bitch was 16 at the time. She gave a statement to the police and told them, yeah, she was hoeing, that I was pimping, and that she was 16, and that I didn't know that. Okay?
Hey, drugs, guns, murder, that's all we know. Hey, I jumped off the porch, I was a preteen. Yeah, running through my city like a track meet. I just got a load worth about a half a ticket. 30 in the blicker when I'm out here chasing chicken. Was observant to the game when I used to play the benches. Now I swipe the Vinci, got them looking at me different. I can't miss him, yeah. AR with a stenching, yeah. Venom when I kiss him, yeah. Gang, gang. Phone jumping off the chain like what's the business? I'ma pull up with the yay like what's the business? Eating lunch with the blood like what's the business? AR double drum like what's the business? 420s, I just counted off a drug deal. You ain't a grinder, you got fronted, how your plug feel? Get them in, get them gone, that's how my plug feel. We was sliding on the out, now that's a hit. Keep a blicker when we move, we got them sticks.
On August 25, 2020, a 17-year-old named Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 men during a protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the shoot and death of Jacob Blake by police. The public's reaction to the verdict was divided. There were supporters who thought that Rittenhouse was a vigilante, while there were others who felt that he was a terrorist. Protests resulted around the country due to the Rittenhouse verdict. A riot even ensued in Portland, Oregon. In a trial the following year, prosecutors argued that Rittenhouse was acting as an aggressive active shooter who had provoked the protesters. His defense lawyers attempted to portray Rittenhouse as a patriotic teenager who acted in self-defense. The jury found Rittenhouse not guilty on homicide, attempted homicide, and reckless endangerment charges. According to a poll conducted shortly after the trial, it was found that Black Americans overwhelmingly agreed Rittenhouse should have been found guilty, while white Americans were closely divided. Darrell Brooks was one of those Black Americans who were not surprised with the outcome of the Rittenhouse trial. An hour away from Kenosha is the city of Waukesha. Waukesha was an untouched prairie land settled by New Englanders who had traveled west during the early 1800s. It was originally called Prairieville, but when a group of citizens separated from the city, they took the name with them. The remaining settlers renamed their community Waukesha. It's believed that the name is after an Ojibwe word, Waukeshag, the plural for the word fox. It's also possible the name came from the Potawatomi word, Wacha. Wacha was sometimes written as Waukesha or Waukesha. and he was the leader of the local tribe at the time that the first Europeans settled in the area. Waukesha was known for its healing waters, attracting big names like Richard W. Sears and prominent Chicago leaders. Over the decades, the natural springs have either dried up or become polluted, a visual representation of the toxicity seeping its way into the city. Waukesha is extremely proud of its annual Christmas parade. It's a tradition that began back in 1962 under the term of Waukesha's 23rd mayor, Mayor Harold T. Owens. 2020 was the only year in which the Chamber of Commerce canceled the parade, obviously as a result of the COVID pandemic. The parade is an event to bring together the community in celebration of not just the holiday, but the city itself. It joins together local civic groups, businesses, schools, and other public services. It even grants the opportunity for thriving artists and entertainers to perform. It serves as the kickoff of Waukesha's holiday season, and it's gone off without incident for decades, with the exception of an uncommon occurrence. In 2017, a 13-year-old spectator had her foot run over by a float, and while this alarming situation left a damper on the remaining participants, noticeably sucking joy from the air, Santa's appearance at the end of the event restored some of the Christmas spirit to the crowd. The citizens couldn't have known that there were some tragedies that even Santa couldn't mend. And unfortunately, they would not learn this lesson for a few more years. 1 p.m. Waukesha police arrived to set up the staging area at Frame Park. They began by barricading off streets. Flyers had been placed around downtown the week prior to warn folks about the restrictions being placed during the parade. Sergeant David Warner was in charge of ensuring the safety of participants and spectators, and he knew that preparing to arrange the floats was going to be an enormous task, taking about 3 hours. While he wanted to be mindful of the schedule, he also wanted to be certain that the operation would be a smooth one. 3 p.m. Community resource officers, traffic personnel, and volunteers arrived to the park in order to assist Sergeant Warner. They reported to their assigned areas and awaited for further instructions. 3:15 p.m. Erica and her roommate from the Waukesha Women's Shelter, Corey Runkle, were sitting at Frame Park, sneakily sipping on some alcohol with an acquaintance named Nicholas Kirby. Erica had been fighting with Darrell through text all day and was attempting to unwind with her friends. "He wants me to go with him," Erica told them. "That's a bad idea," Nick replied. While Corey and Nick didn't know Darrell Brooks personally, they had heard of the horrors that Erica endured at his hands, and they knew it was not a wise decision to go. But there was some sort of spell that Darrell had over Erica. She had known him for half her life, and he felt like all she really had as far as family in Wisconsin. Nick and Corey wanted to give their friend privacy, so they left her at the park and walked around Dollar General and Speedway, attempting to waste some time while they waited for Erica. Once they began tracking back, Nick checked his phone and noticed that he had several missed calls from Erica. His heart sank to his stomach. Before he even had the chance to dial her number, an incoming call illuminated his screen. As soon as he answered, he heard frantic shouting. "He just hit me. I just jumped out at the gas station, but he's still following me." "Where are you?" Nick fearfully bellowed, but all he could make out was Frame Park through the sounds of Darrell's roaring and Erica's cries. He and Corey began running toward White Rock Avenue. He was able to determine through scrambled screams that she was near the elementary school. At the intersection, the pair found an officer and stopped briefly to implore for backup. "My friend is being assaulted," Nick hollered as he approached. "You need to be on the lookout for a red SUV with a screaming woman near Frame Park." Nick didn't stick around long enough to relay more details. Instead, he continued sprinting toward the scene. 3:50 p.m. Sergeant Warner completed his final drive-through of the parade route and stationed his silver unmarked police cruiser across White Rock and Hartwell, providing yet another roadblock, alerting others that the street was closed. 4 p.m. Sergeant Warner indicated to the parade planner that from a security standpoint, things were ready to begin. And with that, Waukesha kicked off its Christmas season as a community. Though the spectators were shivering from standing on the sides of the route, they had hot chocolate and blankets to fight off the feisty Wisconsin wind. People cheered, and a live stream of the event was broadcasted for the country to watch in real time. This year was particularly special for the residents, as they were unable to join together the year before due to COVID, and 2021 marked the 125th anniversary of Waukesha. Pride was beaming from everyone in attendance as floats crept down the streets, giving out candy to enthusiastic children. Officer Christopher Moss was gladly carrying the state of Wisconsin's flag as he marched with the color guard. He had a late-night shift scheduled afterwards, but he was honored to be part of Waukesha's tradition. While discussing parade matters with a colleague, Warner overheard the other officer's radio requesting a squad to investigate a nearby altercation at the boat ramp in Frame Park. A responding unit replied that they were en route, and the pair continued their conversation. However, the unit was dispatched incorrectly because of the confusion caused by the rushed information relayed by Nick. As Nick and Corey drew closer to White Rock Elementary School, they spotted Erica coming from around an SUV. Her face was swollen, and she was visibly shaken. "I just want to go," she said. Darrell tore off in a hurry, making a sharp U-turn in the middle of the road. He proceeded to accelerate toward Erica, but Corey managed to pull her from the path of the SUV. Darrell jerked the car into park and whipped his door open. Hopping out, he rushed towards the trio and demanded Erica get back in the vehicle with him. As she turned, Corey grabbed onto her friend, refusing to let her obey his command. "You shouldn't put your hands on a woman," she jeered in disgust, stepping up to Brooks. "She ain't no woman," Darrell taunted before smacking Corey across the face. She stumbled back a bit, but caught her balance, then hauled back, throwing several punches in Brooks's direction. Erica instinctively jumped in between the two, and Nick grabbed Corey by her backpack in an attempt to pull her away from the brawl. "You don't belong here. You need to leave now. The police are on their way," Nick told Darrell as he threw his jacket to the ground. He was anticipating more trouble, but Darrell retreated, slamming the SUV's door behind him. He shouted threats towards the women as he sped off. The group quickly collected themselves and began walking away from the commotion when a cruiser drove by. Officer Phillips spotted the three, who appeared to be signaling for him to stop. He spoke to Erica briefly, writing down her complaint, despite her reluctance to speak. 4:37 p.m. At his posted intersection, Sergeant Warner noticed a red 2010 Ford Escape at a high rate of speed headed right toward him. He waved his hands above his head, desperately trying to get the attention of the driver. But as he whizzed by, Warner could see that Brooks was staring straight ahead, never once acknowledging his presence. Detective Casey was stationed a little further down the route, and when Brooks rolled up toward him, he wasn't going very fast. Casey slammed his fists on the hood, hoping the driver would stop, but he was brushed to the ground when Brooks dashed down Main Street. When Officer Butrin encountered Darrell at the next intersection, he put his hand up, hoping he would halt. But instead, Darrell drove right by. Butrin thought that he could open the door, the vehicle was so close, but when he reached for the handle, the SUV raced away. The cop chased after the car on foot, despite knowing he couldn't catch up to it. He followed as far as he could, as it swerved from side to side, leaving behind a trail of destruction. 4:38 p.m. Officer Phillips was coaxing Erica to speak about the domestic incident when all at once, radio calls for emergency assistance echoed and overlapped. Corey and Nick were encouraging Erica to be candid about Darrell's abuse when Phillips abruptly excused himself, rushing off in his cruiser. Sergeant Warner ran to his vehicle, anxiously attempting to get his message out on the radio regarding the red SUV, but he instantly heard the nightmarish sounds he feared. Even as an 18-year veteran of the force, Warner said it was the worst thing he had ever heard. A code had been cried out across all channels for anyone in the county to help. This was an absolute crisis the city itself simply could not handle. Driving at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour, Darrell Brooks first hit Nicole White, who was with Remax. There was no way he could have missed the iconic hot air balloon that accompanied the float. At this moment, Darrell had a legal and moral obligation to stop, but he didn't. As he continued, he drove into the Waukesha South High School band, striking 10 students. He ran over them as if they were nothing more than speed bumps. Somehow, this did not slow him down, though. Brooks slammed into the Burris Logistics Group, severely hurting Kelly Grabo and her daughter Adelia, who were dressed like the Who's from Whoville. The Green family were also injured when they were knocked off their bench. Brooks had attacked 15 people at this time, and he only increased his speed as he collided with the Waukesha Blazers, a youth baseball team, and the Extreme Dancers, whose ages ranged from toddlers to teenagers. Spectators were not safe either. Many were struck by the vehicle, debris, and even by other people. A sort of stampede formed as families rushed every which direction, searching for safety. The only time during this ambush that Brooks applied his brakes was when he ran into the Citizens Bank crew. This momentary pause was solely an effort to get Jane Kulik's body off of his hood, and without a single shred of remorse, he crushed her body with that 2-ton battering ram. 4:39 p.m. Unsuspecting children were on the street collecting candy that passing floats had tossed to them. No one saw the red SUV until it knocked the kids down like they were merely bowling pins. Darrell sped up toward the dancing grannies. This definitely became one of the deadliest points in the parade, yet he never once stopped, even after mowing down the parishioners who were asked to walk with the Catholic communities of Waukesha that year. The assistant police chief of Franklin just happened to be present, nestled toward the end of the parade with his family. Noticing a strange break in the formation, he could hear the glee turn to panic from the gathering ahead, and he awaited in anticipation of what was coming his way. Unexpectedly, a red SUV burst through the middle of the group. As its engine revved, he considered the possibility that the driver was having some sort of medical emergency, so he leapt up to see if he could be of some use. It wasn't until Darrell stuck his upper half out the open window and glanced back excitedly that Assistant Chief Learman knew that this was an intentional act. He stared in shock as Brooks cranked the steering wheel to the right, directly into the Catholic community group. There was pandemonium everywhere, yet strangers hurried to see if they could somehow aid anyone who was wounded. Carnage scattered the streets of downtown Waukesha, and the music and laughter that once filled the air was drowned out by screams of agony, prayers, and the distant ringing of gunshots, which only heightened the fear that lingered in the atmosphere. Officer Bryce Skolton was assigned to the tail end of the route on Main Street and Wisconsin Ave. Suddenly, his radio rang out with desperate pleas for ambulances. The incoming cries for help intensified, and the crowd began to gasp and shout in horror. A red SUV came screeching down the street, braking hard as it turned the corner. Officer Skolton instantly realized the radio traffic, the sudden screaming, and the unbelievable damage of the speeding vehicle were all connected, and he knew what he had to do. Despite the windshield being the best opportunity, there were too many children in the vicinity to make a safe shot, so Skolton waited until the SUV passed him to fire 3 times. Brooks barreled over the barricades as he hastily drove off. "4:49 p.m. An off-duty Milwaukee County officer named Ralph waited at the Waukesha Library for his children, completely unaware of the chaos that had unfolded only a block away. When his girls arrived at the meeting spot, the Salyer family agreed that it was too cold to watch the rest of the parade and began their trek towards the middle school where they were parked. Ralph's wife and youngest child separated, searching for her vehicle, while he and his oldest daughter continued on down Maple Avenue towards his. Ralph happened to notice a red SUV driving behind some houses. Strange, he thought to himself. There must be an alley back there. He shrugged it off and kept walking, until a loud crashing sound caught him off guard. Snapping his head around to search for the source, he saw the SUV sputter out in a driveway. Darrell Brooks exited the driver's side, at last, to assess the mangled mess in front of him. "Fuck," he yelled, before scurrying back towards the open door. Darrell made a mad dash to grab his things and get the hell out of there. Ralph could see the extensive damage of the vehicle and assumed it must have been what the noise he heard was. But he was baffled by the behavior of Brooks. Believing that Darrell was a drunk driver, he dialed 911. Carlos Areciago was in his bedroom when he heard what sounded like metal scraping on concrete. He peeked from his blinds to see a red SUV dragging itself to rest in his driveway. Immediately, Carlos grabbed his phone and texted his neighbors, unsure whether this car belonged to a friend of theirs. He slipped on his sneakers and darted downstairs just in time to see Darrell fleeing. Carlos cautiously approached the mangled mess of a vehicle. It was evident that the unnerving disturbance he had heard moments earlier was related to this mysterious heap he was staring at. His neighbors stepped out onto the porch and saw Carlos standing by the SUV. They confirmed that they were unfamiliar with it as well, and the group surrounded the scene, careful not to touch anything. Ralph noticed the crowd beginning to form by the vehicle while he was still speaking to the emergency service. "Do you guys know who owns that car?" he shouted. Carlos and his neighbors shook their head in denial and attempted to explain their limited knowledge of the situation. When Sean Backler heard strange sounds coming from his garage, he went to inspect. He hadn't been at the parade earlier that day and had no clue of the tragedy that took place only minutes before. He was simply working around his yard when a sweaty, wide-eyed black man appeared from the side of his garage. The trespasser was wearing only a t-shirt and didn't have on any shoes, which struck Sean as truly odd in the Wisconsin wintertime. "What in the fucking hell are you doing here?" exclaimed Backler. The unknown man lifted his shirt and cried, "I'm not armed. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to call an Uber to get home." "No, you need to leave my yard," Backler shouted. Darrell continued to beg Sean to use his phone, but Backler refused and demanded Brooks get off his property. Officer Skolton provided a detailed description of the vehicle to Officer Moss, who set off to patrol the immediate vicinity when a Hispanic man flagged him down. Abel Lascano told Officer Moss he could bring him exactly to where the vehicle was that they were searching for. "Get in," Moss ordered Lascano, listening attentively to the directions provided. In the driveway of 338 Maple Avenue was the heavily damaged Ford Escape, guarded by a handful of citizens. Moss requested they return to their home as he cleared the crime scene of any imminent threats. Upon deeming the SUV empty of any occupants, Moss called for backup and attempted to locate any additional information, phoning in the license plate to dispatch as well as searching through some paperwork found inside. The vehicle was registered to Don Woods, but there was the name of Darrell Brooks Jr. on items found inside. He radioed out the details of Darrell as a possible suspect in the parade attack. 4:51 p.m. Darrell slowly started toward Dominic Caproon and his sons as they were loading water jugs into their truck. Caproon's oldest son saw Brooks first and silently pointed, prompting Dominic to turn around in curiosity of what was captivating his son's attention. That's when Darrell walked up the driveway further. "I don't have any weapons. I just need to use your phone to call an Uber," he said as he held up his shirt and spun in a circle. "Yeah, sure." Caproon handed his phone over to Darrell and began to explain that his neighbor was a rideshare driver. Brooks dialed a number and thanked Caproon repeatedly, talking to somebody momentarily before returning it to Dominic. Dominic continued to talk, but when he turned around to face Brooks, he realized he was gone. Erin Cordes and her family were hurrying back to their car after the parade when Darrell appeared from the shadows between two houses. "Hey, yo, do either of you got a phone I can use?" he asked as he approached. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to use your phone." Erin looked at her husband and hesitantly handed her phone over. They were both on edge considering the catastrophic event that just happened, and now this strange encounter. As Darrell demanded his mother order an Uber, Erin glanced around. "What street is this?" he barked. Unsure, Erin looked to her husband to answer. "Damn, I'm freezing. Do you know where I can go to warm up?" Darrell asked as he returned her phone. Erin's husband directed him toward the lobby of Aries Industries where he worked, and the family fled as fast as they could. 5:01 p.m. Daniel Ryder was relaxing watching the Cowboys and Chiefs game after a day of deer hunting, when his Ring doorbell alerted him to the presence of someone at his front door. An African-American man with dreadlocks, wearing only a t-shirt and no shoes, stood before him, begging to use Ryder's phone. Without a second thought, Daniel invited the man inside to warm up and wait for his ride. He presented a jacket and a sandwich. Daniel even graciously let the shivering stranger use his cell phone. "Thank you so much, man, for showing me love, bro," Darrell said.
Hey, I called an Uber and I'm supposed to be waiting for it over here, but I don't know when it's coming. Can you call it for me, please? I'm homeless.
5:10 p.m. Darrell was beginning to feel hopeful that he may escape his actions. But when cruisers creeping up and down the street caught Daniel's eye, apprehension started in. "Hey, we don't get a lot of police traffic on the street, and I'm getting kind of nervous. This is too weird of a situation. You're fine to wait for your Uber, but you need to do it outside of my house," Ryder remarked. Darrell knew he would be arrested as soon as the cops spotted him, so he attempted to alleviate Ryder's concerns. No, it's fine, man, it's fine. I'm not armed, don't worry," Darrell brokered, but Daniel wasn't budging as he began to escort Brooks towards the door. Daniel waited as Darrell finished up his phone call and handed back his jacket when his neighbor shouted over. Ryder recoiled into his home and remained by the window, watching what Brooks did next. When Darrell pounded on the door, pretending his ID fell out in Ryder's home, Daniel indicated that he would search for it, but refused to allow Brooks back inside. His instincts proved to be accurate, as the authorities concentrated their concerns on Brooks as he paced the porch.
What's up? Hands up! Put your hands where I can see them. Put your hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Do it now! Hey, taking one of the hospitals for a plan here. What did I do? Lay on your stomach. What did I do? Robert, 277, are you on? This reaches. Robert 277. It's still more right. You got something with your name on it, man? No. Okay, lads. Cooperate with us. Okay. Dispatch unit on multiple units. David 216, you know, what is your name? Brooks. First name? Darrell. I just used somebody's phone to call for a living, that's all. Oh, okay. That's what I need. Yeah, 1 male 1026 to blackmail and Freddy short sleeve shirt. I'll tell you what. Okay. If everything turns out to be on the up and up, life will be good, and you'll be on your way, all right? Yes. I got it, guys. I got it. Suspect, I presume? Unknown. Ask him. Ask him if he knows. He was on the porch here. Yeah, I was using his phone.
Did he know this guy? Absolutely not. Okay.
I was using his phone.
You're holding this WMH drone, loading her down.
I called my
Any squads available for a transport?
On the 500. Just give me a lift. That's all. I was just using his phone.
Darrell, this is Schwartz. I'm leaving WSC. Where do you need me?
What? Can I just sit up? I was freezing. Can I please just sit up? you have any weapons on you? No, sir. What's your name, guy? 9209. I just told her my name.
What did you tell Park?
Yes, sir. What's your first name? Darrell Brooks? Yes, sir.
No additional victims. Can we start on the next block?
Copy. No additional victims.
This matches the description of the guy that got called on who was going door to door over here.
Yeah, I was trying.
Where are your shoes, man?
I was trying to use somebody's phone.
Where are your shoes?
My flip-flops is in his house. He just gave me a jacket.
Shoes identifying soft fat, lighter skin, black male, dreadlocks, red shirt, blue jeans, no shoes.
Yeah, I did go to the house. I went to that house right there, right down the street, right here.
Where you coming from, man?
I was coming from that parade down here.
Okay.
I know a friend down here.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Stand up for me, Darrell.
I can't.
Mr. Brooks.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Roll over on your butt.
Okay, now
Roll over on your butt. Roll up on your knees. Roll over on. Roll up on your knees.
Okay.
500 block of Elizabeth.
Stand up.
Now, 553 Elizabeth.
What are you doing?
Freaking sweet.
Factory here.
Did I do something?
That is yet to be
Go to
determined,
the front of
sir.
my squad, man.
Okay.
Is there anything on you that's going to stick me, poke me, hurt
No,
me?
not at all, sir.
Okay.
Not at all. I don't have any weapons.
Glad to hear it.
Nothing like that.
How did you get up over here, man?
I was coming to see a friend.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Where's your friend?
I don't know now.
Spin your back your hand for me. You injured at all, dude?
Yeah.
What hurts?
When they slammed me, my knee, I already have an injury.
Spread your feet for me.
Okay, yes. That's my ID.
It certainly is.
Yes. I'm so cold.
I bet you are. Get you in a car here.
Go ahead and take a seat for me, Darrell.
I have a body in front of you. Do you want me to bring it out?
So what hurt?
Officer Garrett Luling pulled over after witnessing a suspect being detained. Approaching the scene, he asked the handcuffed man for his name, knowing that the perpetrator of the parade attack had been identified as possibly being Darrell Brooks Jr. While Carpenter was holding Brooks on loitering charges, Luling was aware that this was larger than it initially appeared. As they emptied Brooks' pockets, they pulled out a single Ford key. This was their guy. Brooks claimed to be injured as a result of being thrown to the ground, although it was obvious from body cam footage that he was not. However, he was transported to Waukesha Memorial Hospital, where all of his victims were, waiting for medical attention, and he had to receive medical clearance before he could even be questioned. After wasting everyone's time, the Waukesha police and the FBI attempted to question Brooks, but within 25 minutes, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Around midnight, he was transported to Muskego Police Department, where he was booked and held until Detective Jay Carpenter could meet with him the next morning. Darrell was fed and fell asleep, requesting water and a phone call when he awoke. During his second interview with police, the FBI were not present in the room, which seemed to put Brooks at ease. He told the detectives that he had come to Waukesha the previous day with someone named Marcus in a tan Kia. Supposedly, they were going to watch the Green Bay Packers game at a mutual friend Stephanie's house. But when asked for Stephanie's last name or address, Darrell was of course unable to recall them. He claimed while at Stephanie's, another unnamed mutual friend mentioned that they had been speaking to Erica, who was attempting to get in touch with Brooks, despite a no-contact order. Darrell decided that he would have this person reach out to Erica and set up a meeting with her so that he could finally retrieve the $350 he alleged Erica was holding on to for him. Darrell claimed that he walked to Frame Park and met Erica at the entrance, hugging her but storming off when she admitted that she didn't have the money. He denied any domestic incident occurred at all, and that Erica was being vindictive because he refused to have sex with her, and she was supposedly drunk.
The vehicle struck more than 20 individuals. Some of the individuals were children, and there were some fatalities as a result of this incident. An officer did discharge his weapon at the suspect vehicle to try to stop the vehicle. No bystanders were injured as a result of the weapon discharge. We're no longer looking for a suspect vehicle. We do have a person of interest in custody at the moment, but this is still a very fluid investigation. I was present at this tragic event and saw firsthand the resiliency as a community coming together.
Judge Michael Boren was the first judge assigned to the Brooks case. He received his bachelor's degree from Ripon College and his Juris Doctor degree from Marquette University Law School. Before serving on the circuit court, he worked in private practice. Despite being a conservative judge, he is well known for ordering the conditional release of Anissa Weier, the mastermind behind the Slenderman stabbing case that occurred in 2014. Judge Jennifer Darrow found her calling from God, attending Marquette University and Regent University School of Law to fulfill it. She has been licensed to practice since 1996 and served as an assistant district attorney in Waukesha County before going on into private practice with Huppert's and Darrow. She was appointed to the bench in Waukesha County by Scott Walker in 2011 to serve as the Chief Judge of the 3rd Judicial Administrative District. Darrow has been re-elected to her position in 2012 and 2018. Her current term expires in 2024, and she is debating whether she is going to enter the race to become a Supreme Court judge. Susan Opper received her bachelor's degree from University of Wisconsin in Madison and subsequently graduated from Marquette University Law School. She has been a prosecutor since 1991, working for the District Attorney's Office for over 23 years. Opper was appointed District Attorney for Waukesha County in 2015 after working as both an assistant and deputy DA. The conservative attorney has expertise in drug offenses, specifically lens bias cases. Susan Opper plans to retire in 2024. Leslie Basie actually worked as a trust officer with the Waukesha State Bank for 5 years before graduating from the University of Wisconsin in Whitewater with her bachelor's degree. She attended the University of Wisconsin Law School in 1994, beginning her law career immediately afterward. In February 1995, Basie was sworn in as the Assistant District Attorney in the Fond du Lac County District Attorney's Office, and only a year later became Assistant District Attorney in the Waukesha County District Attorney's Office. In 2015, Basie was sworn in as Deputy District Attorney. Her field of knowledge is mainly targeted towards domestic violence cases, although she has prosecuted a variety of crimes, from embezzlement to first-degree intentional homicide. Basie serves as the director in the narcotics unit for the Waukesha County Metro Drug Enforcement Group, as well as the treasurer on the board of directors for the Addiction Resources Council. She also keeps busy by teaching the Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Department at the Waukesha County Technical College. Zachary Wichow received his bachelor's degree from Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, before obtaining his JD from Marquette Law University in 2014. That same year, he started working as a special prosecutor for Kenosha County, later becoming an assistant district attorney for Milwaukee County. Wichow held that position for 5 years prior to being sworn in as an assistant district attorney with Waukesha County in 2019. Somehow he continues to find time to volunteer at the Marquette Legal Clinic for the last decade, as well as serving as the president for Marquette Law School's Criminal Law Society. Anna Keyes, an assistant state public defender, earned both of her degrees from Marquette University. She spent several years in private practice, but devoted the last 6 working for the state. Keyes is regarded as a specialist in criminal defense. Jeremy Perry graduated from University of Wisconsin in 2002 and became a member of the Wisconsin Bar Association. Perry is a public defender who has been licensed for 19 years. Darrell Brooks Jr. did not graduate high school. It is believed that he received his diploma equivalency, but it cannot be confirmed. It was also revealed during pretrial proceedings that Brooks has no college education or law degree. He has, however, read Black's Law Dictionary or excerpts from the internet. As far as legal defense, there are 3 main categories. Under each of these umbrella defenses, there are different types that may apply to individual cases. Now, we're not going to discuss each of these in depth, rather just familiarize you with the terms. In the next section, we will analyze which of these Brooks could and or should have deployed. Defenses based on state of mind and intent: insanity, intoxication, mistake of law or fact. Defenses based on justification: self-defense, duress, necessity. Defenses alleging no crime occurred: consent, abandonment or withdrawal, entrapment. For this defense, 3 elements are required to be proven. Number 1, you lack the intent to harm another person. Number 2, your actions were not, quote, culpable, end quote, negligence. And number 3, you were acting lawfully at the time. Brooks had to have known that his actions would result in serious harm or even death, and he was certainly not acting lawfully at the time of the attack, fleeing from another crime. His lawyers refuted intent by claiming that he, quote, couldn't look at the victim's pictures, end quote, and, quote, begged officers to stop, end quote, when they were showing him the video of the parade attack. Ultimately, Darrell Brooks stated that he, quote, didn't mean to kill nobody, end quote. Now, there are some ways I feel this could have been applied to Brooks's case if brought up in a legal manner. The first was the Ford recalls that were going on. There was a class action lawsuit against Ford at the time for vehicles manufactured with defected water pumps, and it was causing the water pumps to leak into the engine cylinders, and significant damage resulted. In some cases, it completely ruined the engine. The issue with this is that the recalls didn't affect the 2010 model specifically, and the vehicle in question was actually inspected and found not to have this issue, although it was brought up during direct examination about the water pump and how that may affect the operation of the vehicle, and it was proven that this wouldn't have been a factor in this attack. Some of the testimony that could have lent credibility to the lack of intent would be the testimony that referred to some swerving and honking on Brooks's behalf, and he did bring this up in a very insensitive way when he suggested that he could have killed more people if he was aiming for them. An actual lawyer would have worded this much better and elicited this information from witnesses without even having to question it. This is one of the reasons why Brooks really should have had representation, but that is another section we will discuss. And lastly, as far as intent, it was mentioned that Brooks may have gotten on the parade route accidentally and just couldn't find a way off. But the issue with this argument is that he could have run over barricades rather than run over people, and he could have just stopped. That was the ultimate problem. His brakes were in working condition. He could have just stopped. That is the most damning part that shows intent. Brooks didn't stop after hitting the first, the second, the third person. He intentionally kept driving in that parade route. As I stated, there were multiple exits that he could have drove over barricades to get to. Rather, he drove down Main Street because that is where he intended to go, and the parade just happened to be in his way. It's widely misbelieved that the insanity defense is used often in the United States. According to some criminal studies, it's only used in about 1% of felony cases, and that's because this defense is really difficult to prove. Not only is it extremely hard to be successful with this defense, it doesn't necessarily mean that one is going to avoid jail time. Instead, it could mean that they are mandated to spend time in a state mental facility. This can be a bit tricky, but try to follow along. According to the Wisconsin state statute, quote, a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if, at the time of such conduct, as a result of mental disease or defect, the person lacked substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of his or her conduct or conform his or her conduct to the requirements of law, end quote. Further in the statute, it says, quote, the terms mental disease or defect do not include an abnormality manifested only by repeated criminal or otherwise antisocial conduct, end quote. Also relevant is, quote, mental disease or defect excluding responsibility is an affirmative defense, which the defendant must establish a reasonable certainty by the greater weight of the credible evidence, end quote. So what does this mean exactly? Essentially, this means that under the state law of Wisconsin, somebody who has a mental illness or disorder that simply results in them repeatedly violating their law doesn't qualify them as being insane. The only way that you could be deemed insane would be if you were perhaps not in the right frame of mind, meaning that you were hallucinating or just breaking from reality at that point, and were not able to understand that your actions were wrong or unlawful. Another aspect is the affirmative defense part. Now, what this means is that the defendant has the responsibility to prove beyond a reason of clear and convincing evidence that they are mentally ill. In most cases, the defendant doesn't have to present a case at all. It's on the prosecution to prove beyond a reason of doubt that the defendant committed the crime. However, when you use the insanity defense, it puts the onus on the defendant rather than the state. Darrell's mother and grandmother both claimed that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at a young age. Dawn Woods was quoted as saying that Darrell gets explosive when he is panicked or afraid. She blames the system for not providing him with more help during his multiple incarcerations. But she could have filed a mandate for mental health treatment, which is legal in the state of Wisconsin. It was revealed early in the pretrial hearings that Brooks was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder as well. And I believe that he has a multitude of traits under that cluster B personality disorder umbrella. And that is something that I'm going to discuss further. Another interesting note I wanted to mention was when Brooks waived his right to an attorney, he wanted to represent himself. He had to make the claim in court that he had no mental or physical disability that would prevent him from participating in his defense. And he affirmed that. Now let's discuss bipolar disorder a little. This is something I personally have experience with. I was diagnosed at a young age as well. It causes extreme mood swings that can go from manic highs to depressive lows, which is why the name was previously manic depressive disorder. However, there are multiple forms of the condition. There are bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and cyclothymic. The three different types, they present essentially with the same symptoms, just in different ways. Bipolar 1 tends to have longer, more severe mood swings, while bipolar 2 tends to have faster cycling between the periods. And the mania episodes in bipolar 2 are usually not as intense as they are with bipolar 1. In cyclothymic, it tends to have less severe depression but longer periods of hypomania, just not as severe hypomania as you would experience during bipolar 1. And this is a diagnosis that is typically made during the teenage years, so it does make sense that Brooks was diagnosed around age 12. I was diagnosed around age 14. Some symptoms of mania include abnormal, upbeat, jumpy, or wired behavior, increased activity or energy. It can also include increased agitation, exaggerated sense of well-being and self-confidence, which is also called euphoria, decreased need for sleep, unusual talkativeness, racing thoughts, distractibility, and poor decision making. This usually exhibits itself in gambling or shopping sprees. It can also manifest in risky sexual behavior or just making very foolish decisions financially or just in general. The depressive symptoms of bipolar tend to include feeling sad and empty, hopeless and tearful. They also include marked loss of interest and feeling of pleasure from activities, as well as fatigue and loss of energy. It's very much the opposite of mania. You have the feelings of worthlessness and excessive inappropriate guilt, decreased ability to think or concentrate, and you can even have suicide ideations. A case example of this would be Louis Marquez from Boston, Massachusetts. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity for bipolar disorder and was placed in Bridgewater State Hospital. He was accused of stabbing his teacher, who was actually a very close friend of his. And when he was found by police, he was pacing shirtless, covered in blood. He was speaking incoherently. It was very obvious to them that he was not in his right mind. He was in a state of psychosis. And this is something that presents usually with bipolar 1, and it can definitely lead to violence. Not to say that anyone with bipolar 1 can be violent, it's just a behavior that can be increased when untreated bipolar disorder manifests. Brooks was diagnosed by 4 different psychologists with antisocial personality disorder. This is also called sociopathy, and it's when a person consistently shows no regard for right or wrong. They ignore the feelings of other people, and typically somebody who is diagnosed with ASPD presents some sort of like conduct disorder before the age of 15. This can be oppositional defiance disorder or the like. As stated in my warning, I am not a psychologist, but as I watched the trial, my first thought was definitely antisocial personality disorder. The symptoms of this include things like persistent lying or deceit to exploit others, being callous, cynical, or disrespectful, using charm or wit to manipulate others for personal gain, arrogance, a sense of superiority, or being extremely opinionated, recurring problems with the law, including criminal behavior, repeatedly violating the rights of others through intimidation and dishonesty, hostility, significant irritability, agitation, aggression or violence, lack of empathy for others, and lack of remorse, poor or abusive relationships, failure to consider the negative consequences of behavior, and being consistently irresponsible and repeatedly failing to fulfill work or financial obligations. Throughout the trial, all of these things were just checked off with Brooks. While personality disorders are excluded from insanity defenses now, back in the 80s, that was not the case. An example of someone actually using a personality disorder as a defense would be John Hinckley, the man who shot Ronald Reagan in an attempt to impress Jodie Foster. He was hospitalized for years, and he was actually just released, I want to say, in 2016. But Hinckley will always be monitored by the state. He will have evaluations, and if he fails one, he can return to the state's custody at any point. There is no freedom for him. One of the doctors that evaluated Brooks also mentioned that he had some borderline personality disorder traits, and I can definitely see that as well. Someone with borderline personality disorder will have these very rapid cycling, intense relationships with other people and themselves, and they go from idolizing that person to suddenly just being indifferent and cruel. BPD can present these ongoing feelings of emptiness. It can also manifest as inappropriate and intense anger. Now, under the Cluster B umbrella, there are multiple types of personality disorders. That includes antisocial personality, borderline personality, also histrionic and narcissistic personality. And these are 2 conditions that I feel he also has some traits from as well. With histrionic personality disorder, people tend to be very uncomfortable unless they're the center of attention. They act very dramatically, as if they're like performing with an audience, and they exaggerate their emotions and expressions, yet it all seems to lack sincerity. Some of the other symptoms include being overly concerned with your physical appearance, constantly seeking reassurance or approval from others, being excessively sensitive to criticism or disapproval, and having a low tolerance for frustration. Many people are familiar with the word narcissist, and that is basically what narcissistic personality disorder is somebody has this unreasonably high sense of self-importance, and they require constant, excessive admiration from others. They feel that they deserve privileges and special treatment. They expect to be recognized as superior, even through achievements that may seem menial. And they make achievements and talents seem like they are much bigger than they are. The ironic thing about narcissistic personality disorder is the person tends to have this secret feeling of insecurity, shame, humiliation, and fear that other people are going to see them for what they really are, a failure. Now, I couldn't find a real case example of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, like in a court system, but a good example fictionally of this would be Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. The entire Lannister clan actually is pretty narcissistic, but specifically Jaime is a very good representation of narcissistic personality disorder. There were a multitude of times throughout the trial where Brooks was manipulative and just seemed kind of like a pathological liar. A great example of this would be in his opening statement when he reminded the jury of their power as he sobbed. He told the jury that he prayed they make the right decision. And he said that the case that the state was going to present was full of speculation, and it's just based on ridicule from the media. He also would manipulate the court when he would behave inappropriately and then issue an apology as if that was, some sort of excuse. He would say, "I'm sorry, I was just very emotional. That's not how I was raised." And as we mentioned earlier, he claimed that he was injured when he was thrown to the ground during his arrest. He complained of his right shoulder hurting him during his police interview, yet he wasn't showing any physical indication of actual injury. He was still moving his arm in full range of motion and wasn't flinching or favoring it in any sort of way. He was using this as a way to kind of manipulate the situation in his favor. Also, during the interview, he attempts to paint the situation with Erica as being amicable and, she's just crazy and nothing was his fault. Honestly, there were so many lies throughout that interview, I don't even think you could count them. He claimed he was on the porch of Daniel Ryder for 20 to 30 minutes. He claimed that he had come down to Waukesha to hang out with some friends and watch the game. Then he claimed when he was arrested that he was at the parade. He said that his sandals were in Daniel Ryder's house, but they were actually found by a fence, assuming when he jumped over the fence running from police. He claimed that his phone was lost. His phone was actually found in the Ford Escape. There are just so many lies throughout this entire trial that are proven to be lies, yet he continues to ignore it and just present his truth. I think one of the most disgusting ways that Darrell Brooks shows his manipulation is actually in one of his jailhouse calls to Erica. He tells Erica that she is the reason his life is ending, and he blames the entire parade incident on her. It's always this shift of blame. There's no way that Brooks can be responsible. Speaking of the way that Brooks treated Erica throughout the trial, he expresses his controlling and narcissistic tendencies throughout it. It's very evident throughout the trial, in his interview, throughout jailhouse phone calls, that Brooks is a control freak. There was a point in the police interview where detectives had to go check with a supervisor, so they left the room to go call their boss, and Brooks was pissed that they just got up in the middle of the conversation and walked out. He also showed this contempt by calling detectives strictly by their last name, refusing to use their title or their command. Also, during the interview, he asks police repeatedly for the charge. He says, "That's all I want to know. What am I being charged with?" And when they refused to give him exact charges immediately, he says, "Why should I cooperate with you if you refuse to cooperate with me?" The entire situation is about Brooks trying to control the story, the conversation, the dynamic in the room, all of it. Even during trial, Brooks tried to grasp for control at every turn. When there was a concern with a juror possibly having COVID, he wanted medical information and he wanted mandated testing for the jurors. Yet Brooks refused to take a rapid test when he complained of alleged COVID symptoms. He refused to speak to police because it gave him control of the situation. And again, one of the most repulsive parts of his controlling behavior throughout this entire process would be his questioning of Erica on the stand. The state helped Brooks with the serving of subpoenas to witnesses, and when they attempted to help him with calling of witnesses, he refused. He was absolutely childish and threw a tantrum because he could not choose the order in which his witnesses were called. Yet Brooks refused to actually provide a list of his witnesses in the order in which he wanted them presented. So there was a point where he was arguing with the judge and got angry that the state just kind of talked over him. So he slammed his fists on the table and just stared at the judge angrily. And she actually called a recess because it was so intimidating to her. I think ultimately Darrell was angry. He couldn't control the image of himself that was being brought into the courtroom. The state did such an amazing job. They picked such wonderful witnesses, and it presented this idea that was just crystal clear. And when the state brought in Darrell Brooks's rap video, it just poked a hole into this fake image that he was attempting to present to the jury. He didn't want the jury to know him as a gang-banging thug who talked about murder and drugs and all of that stuff in his rap videos. He wanted the jury to see him as this man who was being railroaded by the police, and it was just, he was mentally ill and he was trying his best to be a good dad, and that was the image he was attempting to present, but it's not who Darrell Brooks really is.
All right.
I'll probably have an idea of who I think should come in, but I'm not going to provide an order.
Well, if he wants our assistance, Your Honor, we will do that. Otherwise, he can be responsible for getting these witnesses here himself. You've got to cooperate with this process, or they're assisting you. Otherwise, you're going to be responsible for telling these witnesses when to come in.
And so how am I supposed to do that?
Well, then you should cooperate with the state and their assistance to help you, sir.
I'm not going to give a specific order.
Convictions via OWI 2nd from 1997, and OWI 3rd from 1997, and OWI 4th from 2003. Criminal trespass to dwelling from 2006.
All right, I need to take a break. This man right now is having a stare down with me. It's very disrespectful. He pounded his fist. Frankly, it makes me scared.
This is why I say people, when they're in an extremely delusional state, they get angry when your words start to pierce their delusion. They get legitimately angry.
Bose says it amazingly in this clip. When somebody has this delusion and you are presenting evidence that conflicts with their delusion, they get angry. And that's exactly what we watched over and over again throughout this trial. Although Brooks said that he was better served representing himself, he knew that he was getting life, no matter what. This was a spectacle. This was a show for him to attempt to feel in control of the situation. It was his last hurrah to put on this absolute circus for the cameras and attempt to be memorized for something other than the Waukesha Christmas parade. Another thing I mentioned was just the unwillingness to understand the consequences of his actions. Brooks was shocked that the FBI were interviewing him after this event, and it was because they weren't sure if this was a terrorist attack or not. But he could not believe that the FBI was involved in any way, shape, or form. He even was quoted as saying, "Reckless endangerment, huh? Just because a couple of people got hurt." There just was not a single point where Darrell Brooks asked about the victims. There was no thought about anyone except for himself. I want a phone call. I want to know my charges. Brooks also has a tendency to minimize his behavior. He also avoids talking about things that pierce that delusion. During the interrogation, he says he had a falling out with his mother, but that's not what happened. His mother had a restraining order on him. He says that he wasn't even at the parade. He pretends to know nothing about the parade attack. It's just this complete avoidance. If he doesn't look at it, it doesn't exist.
But I've merely asked of Your Honor numerous times at this point.
God, I hate when people do that. Minimization. I'm just asking you a simple question. It's such an easy request. What's so wrong with you that you can't honor this little tiny, simple, tiny thing that I'm doing when we can all see it's a nightmare? But like, it's like, what are you supposed to do in the middle of that conversation? Have you ever been in a conversation before where somebody's just trying to exhaust you until you give up? There's actually and I feel it, I feel it coming. There's a stress response that's called collapse and submit when you're maybe in like an argument or maybe you're in a high stress environment like this. This would be a high stress environment for me where the pressure is just mounting so much that the person collapses, doesn't fight back anymore, and submits to the will of others. I feel like Darrell is used to that, and he's just trying to exhaust anyone and everyone until he can figure out the next stupid line or until they give in. One of the patterns that I see are Darrell desperately grasping for any source of power he can have, rejecting his name, saying, "I'm going to take my power back by saying you can't call me that." I'm going to take my power back by hiding from the cameras. I'm going to take my power back by constantly talking over you. You're not going to stop me. This reminds me of somebody that just had a parent that made them feel powerless their entire life.
Some rulings previously. Why do you have to roll your eyes at me? Let's start the morning off on a good note,
I didn't
sir.
roll my eyes at you, so I don't think it's fair that you should say I rolled my eyes at you.
I saw you roll your eyes at me. I'm not
I
going to
didn't roll
debate
my
about
eyes at you, so don't do that.
Well, Mr. Brooks, I'd appreciate a little bit more respect. These
I would
rulings,
too, Your Honor.
let me finish.
And just so we clear for the record, is the jury asking you questions or me? Were you able to hear my question clearly?
I don't understand your question.
Were you able to hear my question clearly?
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained. Next question, please. Or rephrase the previous question to the one that was asked just now.
What was not understood about the question that you were asked?
Objection argumentative.
Grounds.
She's also explaining to him the stupidity behind saying grounds after she's already ruled. Because were she to explain those grounds in front of the jury, it would show the jury that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like making him look dumb, which obviously in a trial or any sort of serious criminal trial shouldn't go into the jury's calculation of whether someone is guilty or innocent. But like, it's really hard for it not to go into their consideration, because after a while they're going to think like this person either doesn't know what they're talking about or is intentionally trying to manipulate the system, try to game the system to get some sort of advantage in court that they're not supposed to have.
You will be removed and you will forfeit your right to be present for the examination of this witness. Let's bring the jury back in.
Well, you might as well remove me then, because what you're doing is not fair. I can't even rebut what you're saying. I didn't interrupt you. I let you make your incorrect record.
Wow, this tactic is simply exhaust you emotionally into oblivion and then offer you solutions that are based off of what I want. That is how we roll into collapse and submit. He believes that nothing that he does is wrong. He's one of those people that no matter what he does, he can find a way to justify it in his mind, and that is terrifying.
I think it goes without saying that driving under the influence is illegal, but according to the statute, quote, it is unlawful for any person to cause injury to another person by the operation of a vehicle while under the influence of an intoxicant or controlled substance, end quote. In this statute, they even specify that drive means the exercise of physical control over speed and direction of a motor vehicle when in motion, and operate means to physically manipulate or activate any of the controls of a motor vehicle necessary to put it in motion. Originally, Brooks's defense attorneys were going to present the argument that he was under the influence and was not intending to harm anybody in the parade. Officers had testified initially that his eyes were, quote, red and glossy, end quote, and that there was an odor of burnt marijuana on his person. There was also a small amount of marijuana that was found on Daniel Ryder's porch, and I believe that there was an unlit blunt found in the Ford Escape. Anna and Perry were going to present cannabis use disorder as a defense, but it could have been a better idea to use substance abuse disorder because of the alleged methamphetamine use that Brooks had discussed in his Crystal Darkness documentary participation. I'm assuming the reason that they didn't go with this was because there were no charges on Brooks's record as far as methamphetamine use, possession, any of that, but there were multiple counts of THC possession, so this could definitely be brought up in court as part of his defense. Cannabis use disorder is classified as dependency on marijuana, which can include symptoms of rapid heartbeat, bloodshot eyes, dry mouth, dizziness, hallucinations, paranoia, irritability, anger or aggression, nervousness or anxiety, or just a general depressed mood. In my unprofessional opinion, I think that cannabis use disorder is a bullshit diagnosis. I feel like we jumped to the conclusion that people could be addicted to marijuana easier than we came to the conclusion that they could be addicted to prescription pain pills. And not to get too off topic here, but marijuana does not affect the brain in the same way that other drugs do. Some of the symptoms that they even listed, I don't even think could be attributed to marijuana use, but apparently somebody out there has reported it, so they are also. Some of the legal issues that come up with presenting this argument, though, is how do you determine what level of THC impairs the driver? And how do you determine when the marijuana was used, if it was used minutes, hours, days, or even weeks before the incident occurred? While Darrell Brooks has no confirmed methamphetamine usage, there are a lot of presentations of methamphetamine use that correlate with his own behavior. The difficulty is that they also correlate with some of the mental illnesses that he has. So these include euphoria, aggression, racing thoughts, severe depression, following methamphetamine usage. And this has to do with the sudden release and depletion of certain hormones, violent mood swings, delusions of power. Those are all things that can be presented with personality disorders as well. Even with bipolar disorder, there are some of those symptoms. So it's very difficult to say whether it would be drugs or whether it would be his mental health that would result in these specific behaviors. Because the emotional aspects of methamphetamine use are so difficult to determine with him, I looked at some of the physical manifestations, and these included a frail or thinning body, facial acne or sores, rotted teeth, which is usually called meth mouth, a droopy quality to the skin, and that's usually because of the smoking. You lose elasticity, liver damage, which can result in jaundicing, yellowing of the skin, a dramatic increase in body temperature, which can result in sweating, increased libido, and intense scratching. I didn't notice a majority of these with him. I honestly looked at his teeth, and I'm not trying to judge him on his teeth. It could just be a lack of dental care. It didn't look like the typical meth mouth presentation. Just recently, though, in Bakersfield, California, a man was found not guilty of vehicular manslaughter after it was revealed that he had been under the influence of methamphetamine right before getting behind the wheel. Erica appeared on a YouTube channel called The Norman Nick Show, and she did a little bit of an interview with him, and she revealed that she didn't know Darrell Brooks to do methamphetamine at all. She had known him for 15, 16 years and not once had seen him do it. But she did reveal that he was apparently a fan of smoking marijuana and taking ecstasy pills. The last offense I believe that Darrell Brooks may have been attempting to go for was mistaken identity. He asks a lot about the windows being tinted and whether people could see into the back of the vehicle, so I'm not sure if he's attempting to claim that there were people behind him holding him under duress, or if perhaps he was being mistaken as the driver. It also seems like he is claiming the damage from the vehicle was from the crash in the driveway rather than being from the parade. But this doesn't explain the clothing from the participants that were stuck to the vehicle. Brooks even brings up whether he has long hair or short hair, because at the time of the offense he obviously had dreadlocks, while at the time of trial he has a shaven head. He even attempts to make this point with his weight, as if it is not something that can be changed very easily. He's eating at a jail now rather than eating at home. His weight is going to fluctuate. The same with his hair. It can be altered at any point in time. Initially, the call that came across was multiple suspects fleeing from the vehicle, and this was because the residents from the home that came outside and kind of guarded it got misconstrued that they were fleeing from the vehicle rather that they were kind of standing around it. And through this confusion, the description of a Hispanic male came over, and Brooks latched onto that. And I have to say that he appears lighter in trial than he does in some of the other pictures that I've seen of him. So whether somebody could mistake him for being Hispanic rather than a light-skinned African American is questionable. One of the biggest problems that Brooke has with this theory, though, is that his own mother provided ring footage showing what he was wearing that day and showing that the front end of her vehicle had no damage. So his story just does not make sense. It's heavily implied by Brooks throughout the trial that witnesses may be identifying him as the driver because they have preconceived notions about him from the media. He claims his image and prior convictions being blasted across the stations have only biased the jury against him. And this includes the use of him and the case in political ads. The court did its due diligence during the extensive voir dire process, though. They wanted to make sure that this jury was not tainted at all because they do not want a chance in appeal. A major flaw in this mistaken identity argument, though, is the DNA testing that was testified to. It was 1 in 1 quadrillion chances that a mixture of Erica Patterson and Darrell Brooks's DNA was on the steering wheel. It was actually higher than that, but because of the way the software program is engineered, it doesn't allow the number to get any higher than that. That's the maximum that it'll allow. Just to clarify, there are only 7 billion people in this world, so Erica and Darrell's DNA were also found on the gear shift. The hat that was found stuck to the hood of the vehicle had Bill Hospel's DNA, who was one of the victims that passed away. A sweatshirt that was found in a children's playhouse, it was one that Brooks was spotted wearing, however he took it off during his run from the cops. It was found to have a blood stain on one of the cuffs of the sweatshirt, and it also had hair in the back hood part. The blood was Erica Patterson's from when Darrell smacked her, and the hair was Darrell Brooks's hair.
But it's very insensitive and unfair to not recognize that there's many other victims that never is talked about. And for people to paint a certain picture, mostly from this county, to put this picture out there, it's not only hurtful, but it's insensitive, and it's not true.
What is the sovereign citizen defense? Sue Opper nailed it when she stated that Brooks's defense was simply to delay, disrupt, and mislead in hopes of creating a mistrial or being successful upon appeal. It's just as straightforward as that. Brooks looked for every single possibility he could to raise suspicion, praying that his idea would reach at least one juror. Personally, I've seen the antics in tax evasion, mortgage fraud, and money laundering cases, but I have never once seen it used in a homicide trial. And there is a reason for it. It has absolutely no merit in court, and it's completely baseless in fact. What is a sovereign citizen? Despite the movement being around for almost a century, the Darrell Brooks trial really put a spotlight on the term. So what exactly is a sovereign citizen? Well, it's a label for a number of anti-government groups that generally hold the same conspiratorial beliefs about the law. It begins at birth, when a certificate is produced in your name. This document is a contract, and the name on it in full capital lettering is the legal entity created, while you, the human being, are none the wiser. This entity is tied to your social security number, which serves as an account number for a secret strawman account held by the U.S. Treasury. This is called the redemption scheme, and it's based on the notion that America became bankrupt in 1933 after it was removed from the gold standard. As a result, it's using the Federal Reserve notes as a form of credit since cash is apparently worthless. To alleviate its debt, the government is using its citizens as collateral against foreign debt, essentially enslaving Americans without their knowledge. This idea is actually way more nuanced, but I'm trying to summarize it and make it a bit more digestible to avoid making this section an hour long, because this can get confusing, especially if you're unfamiliar with the topics being discussed. And once you start looking into it, you can really get lost in the vast array of information that's out there, and it almost can seem legitimate at times. Soft-sits have been known to utilize Black's law interpretations in an attempt to validify their theories. One of the most widespread being that because as human beings we did not agree to being born, nor were we consulted about the statutes in place at the time of our births, that we should not have to acquiesce to them if we do not consent. Sovereign citizens have this entire process and language to their scheme, including relinquishing their citizenship and declaring themselves sovereign through a document called the Affidavit of Truth. They have produced their own driver's licenses, license plates, passports, and even have their own common law courts that travel across the country and act as judges and grand juries, administering liens on those that they deem have violated their laws. The FBI has classified extremists in the movement as domestic terrorists, the most notable of these cases probably being that of Timothy McVeigh and his accomplices who perpetrated the Oklahoma City bombings. They have estimated there to be about 100,000 practicing soft-sits in the United States, with another 200,000 just starting out.
The jury is in this courtroom, and you will show respect for them and for this court.
Respect for them would be
Mr. Brooks,
telling them the truth.
stop. I'm putting you on notice that you are on the verge of this court creating a curative instruction about your frivolous arguments. I will not have you claim legitimacy for what are debunked, frivolous, sovereign arguments.
Then
that is why
prove it.
your questions
Prove it.
are being
Prove that it's
objected
frivolous.
to,
Prove
and
that
why-
it's frivolous. I'm here without prejudice by special appearance. Beneficiary, I'm here under fraud, menace, duress, and extortion. Judiciary, Jennifer R. Darrell. This is a social security, SESTQ, trust action which you are a real party and interest to, as sui juris and propria persona. This is a military admiralty tribunal and maritime law under Title 4 of the United States Code Section 1, which you can see, which states placing of fringe on a national flag is within discretion of president acting as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy. Is this a common law court or an admiralty court?
Even though there is common law, and also I gotta back up. Common law and admiralty law, they're not even like in conflict. That's like saying like we can't have bacon for breakfast because we're having pancakes. Like you actually can have both. Nevertheless, the thing that he's charged with and many other crimes arise under statutes, like laws passed by legislative bodies. This is not a common law situation.
From my knowledge, the design of the statutes of the law was written for the common people to understand. So that would mean the final determination or interpretation of what the law says comes down to the people. You know this, Your Honor. Are you not a public servant? There was no record of a bond in my docket sheet. I asked for that to be verified by proof. That hasn't been provided. There's so many biases, clear biases in questions that are not being asked based on judicial determinations made by Your Honor. You look at the discrepancies, and I think they're clear. I think at minimum I deserve for the subject matter jurisdiction to be verified and proven. I've raised that issue numerous times, pretty much every day.
So the first mistake that that he makes once we get into the trial is that he's either challenging that the court has subject matter jurisdiction, or he wants an explanation for how the court could possibly think that it has subject matter jurisdiction. Let's get real simple about this. Subject matter jurisdiction has to do with a court's ability to hear a type of claim. If that sounds complicated, it's actually not. Now, you can tease out the fringes of this and it can get pretty rarefied, but here's a real simple construct for you. A bankruptcy court has jurisdiction over bankruptcy subject matter, right? A divorce court has subject matter over, I hear you saying family law cases, and you're correct. Now, in most states, including Wisconsin, these criminal cases are going to be heard in the criminal division of a larger state court system. But that state court system has plenary or general jurisdiction over all types of claims which would arise under state law. And the many other, apparently the 70 other counts that he's been charged with, arise under, it's a criminal violation that arises under state law in every single state. The idea that you would challenge a state court judge over whether or not it has subject matter jurisdiction over a murder committed in that state is completely ludicrous.
To the decision of Your Honor for me to be removed from the proceedings over the last few days, that was used from the Illinois versus Allen, right?
Correct.
Illinois versus Allen is a case that is referenced quite often throughout this trial. And essentially what pertains from that case to this one are the following. A defendant can lose his right to be present at trial if, following the judge's warning that he will be removed if his disruptive behavior continues, he nevertheless insists on conducting himself in such a disruptive manner that his trial cannot proceed if he remains in the courtroom. He can reclaim the right to be present as soon as he is willing to comport himself with decorum and respect. A trial judge confronted by a defendant's disruptive behavior can exercise discretion to meet the circumstances of the case. And though no single formula is best for all situations, there are at least 3 constitutionally permissible approaches for the court's handling of an obstreperous defendant. Number 1, bind and gag him as a last resort, thereby keeping him present. Number 2, cite him for criminal or civil contempt. Or number 3, remove him from the courtroom while the trial continues until he promises to conduct himself properly. On the facts of this case, the trial judge did not abuse his discretion. Respondent, through his disruptive behavior, having lost his right to confrontation under the 6th and 14th Amendment.
I also had cited to a case that I believe is on point, although not binding on this court. I am persuaded by the reasoning in United States versus Jennings, found at 855 F Sup 1427.
Does any one of those mention the being present through audio and visual?
Yes, audio. In other words, the defendant in that case, who also was a pro se defendant, was removed from the courtroom after he said he would continue disruptive conduct in the presence of prospective jurors, but he was able to continue to listen to proceedings through loudspeakers and transmit messages to the court, was barred, and what the court held is he was barred from the proceedings by his own conduct, not by the court, and the conviction in that case was affirmed.
I do represent myself pro per. I would like that stated for the record. Like the record to reflect that, not pro se.
Pro se. What is pro se? It literally translates to for oneself. It is simply meaning that you are a litigant who is choosing to represent themselves. Every American has the right to counsel under the Sixth Amendment, and they have the right to waive this counsel as well. Doing so would allow you to appear as pro se, and that right is only preserved in criminal cases. It doesn't exist in civil matters. Representing yourself means that you are being held to the same standards of knowledge as other attorneys. You are expected to follow a procedure and decorum just like any other lawyer. Pro per comes from the Latin phrase in propria persona, and that essentially means in their own person. The reason Darrell Brooks stresses that he is appearing as pro per rather than pro se is because corporations can file lawsuits as pro se litigants, but not pro per. Pro per litigants may, however, appear as a third-party representative on behalf of their client, like Brooks claims he is doing in so many of his tangents.
I've briefly read Illinois versus Allen. It didn't say, it didn't give any reference at all to him being present by audio or visual in that case whatsoever. It just strictly talks about the reasons that he was removed and the options that the judge had in that. One of them being that he could be bound and gagged. One of them being that he can be held in contempt and removed from the courtroom while the trial would continue, but it did not say anything about being present visually or audio.
There would be no one formula for maintaining the appropriate courtroom atmosphere, and no one formula will be best in all situations. But the Supreme Court said this: we think there are at least 3 constitutionally permissible ways for a trial judge to handle an obstreperous defendant like Allen. And my findings here are that there's a 4th way, and that's through the wonders of technology that weren't available in 1970 when that decision was authored.
I'm still having trouble finding the file for that particular witness.
Yeah, call the jury in.
So I don't know how I'm supposed to.
Mr. Brooks, you were well advised. These are your witnesses that the state made arrangements. You knew who was going to be called. I put that on the record yesterday. So of those 3, whatever order you want, but I'm not moving past those 3 to jump to others.
I didn't say anything about moving past the 3.
I know that. I just set the tone for today that we're going to keep moving.
Okay, I simply stated I'm not ready to ask that witness questions if I can't even find the
I
their
understand,
paperwork.
But that's you not having your paperwork's on you, not anybody else.
So what am I supposed to ask him?
I can't answer that, sir. You know that.
That's a rush to judgment. You can't rush me to judgment when I'm notifying the court that I cannot find the record.
Well, you did very well yesterday without your file, so
I'm saying that particular witness.
I
have all of them here. Your oath, Your Honor, as a public servant. And
Mr.
now you're
Brooks,
rushing me to judgment
there's no
when
rush
I'm
to
doing
judgment.
things lawfully by trying to notify you and notify the court of issues that need to be addressed
Mr. Brooks,
beforehand.
we are in
These
the
were issues-
evidentiary phase of this trial.
Your Honor, you're
Call
rushing
your
me to
next
judgment.
witness.
You're rushing me to judgment, Your Honor. And I object
I'm
to
aware
that.
of 3 witnesses
I
who are
object-
here.
I object
Call
to
one
that.
of them, please.
Your Honor, I object to that.
Your objection's noted.
And I want a legal reconsideration of your ruling. If not, I reject that ruling and take exception to that ruling.
I understand.
I request a legal or a factual basis for your ruling, a written judicial finding of fact and conclusion of law for your ruling, and if not that, an interlocutory, declaratory appeal for this matter, and if not, these need to be stayed until this matter is before a adjudicated court of competent jurisdiction, because we have not proven jurisdiction in this court as of yet.
This is just another appeal antic from Brooks. He feels as though there has been a rush to judgment on topics that have absolutely no basis or bearing on subjects that have already been discussed and determined upon repeatedly throughout the trial. From what I could find, an interlocutory appeal would deal with decisions that are being made by the trial judge that don't have a direct determination on the final judgment in the case. I feel like this is yet another attempt to delay the trial, which is why he asks for a stay until the interlocutory appeal can be handled. Because there would be absolutely no reason to stay it if the decision being concluded by the appellant judge has absolutely no bearing on the final outcome of the case as a whole.
Objection. I don't consent to being called that name.
For the record, I'm not a person, I'm a human being.
Sovereign citizens are notorious for their use of semantics, and Brooks is no stranger to this game himself. Throughout trial, he claims that he does not consent to being called his own birth name, and we discussed that earlier in the sovereign citizens section, why they do this. But an interesting one that I found was when he says, "I am not a person, I am a human being." Yet he is choosing to present himself as pro-per, which is in one's own person. Sovereign citizens like to play this semantics game, even though it can be used against them. All it is a distraction tactic.
That's the typical thing of, we're talking about this, and then they come and they say, well, what about this? And they try to get you to engage with the thing over there, because then they can go, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And it just builds a little net that gets further and further and further, or I'm sorry, a little web that gets further and further and further away from the core issue that we're talking about.
I accept for value in return for value this document.
Sovereign citizens believe that by stating the phrase or writing it on a document, that they're creating a binding contract between the receiving and submitting parties, subjecting both sides to an acknowledgement and abidement by the contract itself. But of course, it cannot be that easy. If a soft sit is the receiving party and they do not agree to the content of the document, they feel they have the right to modify it and negotiate the contract and submit it.
Is that a tacit agreement and a judicial determination that you don't have to answer that question as a public servant, Your Honor?
Darrell Brooks hilariously refers to this as a tacit agreement throughout most of the trial until the judge corrects him. And essentially what a tacit agreement is interpreting someone's silence and lack of objection as consent to a particular agreement. From what I could understand, an example of this would be like agreeing to terms of service on a website. I cannot see how this would be applicable to a criminal court with a trial judge, except in the delusion of Darrell Brooks.
Which speaks to the language is basically, it speaks to the same thing. It speaks about manifest necessity. It speaks about if there's an issue of exculpatory evidence, things of that nature.
My jaw dropped when this concept was introduced at the very end of trial by Brooks. With this request, he is asking the judge to discharge the jury and declare a mistrial due to the impossibility of a fair determination being made. The court jumped through hoops to ensure that the jury and rulings were all impartial and unbiased as possible. And it's just another desperate move in the legal game of chess where Darrell Brooks thinks he's playing checkers instead. It's honestly astounding to watch him think that he is accomplishing something with these frivolous arguments.
What this is narcissism, and this is psychopathy. This is where the whole world's wrong but you. And this man is trouble from Git. And look, just by his stature here, you see my little cursor? His head is way too goddamn big for his body. That thing ain't full of nothing but goddamn black supremacist talking points and sovereign citizen, ideology. That somebody probably talked him up. Some jailhouse lawyer is like, nah, man, you go out there, you tell them white motherfuckers, look here, man, I never consent to these motherfucking laws. That's what you tell them white motherfuckers. They just blew the whistle on this guy, so any yard this guy goes to, he's not going to one of the sweet spots. He's going to he's going to the place where Jeffrey Dahmer rode a broomstick, but not like a witch.
One of the fastest ways this rhetoric seems to be spreading is through prisons. Soft-sit bullshit is common in prison, where there is endless time to browse through law libraries in a vain attempt to justify disgusting acts. Law enforcement and former prisoners both agree that it's a pretty typical belief held by sex offenders. If Darrell Brooks' sovereign citizen beliefs didn't give it away, then the prosecution certainly gave away his sex offender status. And as mentioned in this clip, the consequences of the prosecution doing this is going to be great for Brooks. When he goes into any certain prison, he is going to be targeted, not only because he murdered elderly and the children, but because he also groomed a 15-year-old. There are many prisoners who do not take lightly to those things. And believe me, Brooks will find out one day. He is not going to be in isolation forever. People never forget, and there are people in there for life who have absolutely no problem with making his life a living nightmare every single day.
And if that's the case, then I should be allowed to tell the jury what they need to know, which is the truth. That they have the power. They have the power to nullify laws that they don't agree with.
You are absolutely not allowed to tell the jury that. There's a jury instruction that I will have ready to go if you even attempt to raise the issue of jury nullification, sir. You have absolutely no right to raise that. That is clear under the law.
I can raise what I want to raise.
You should be informed that you have the power to nullify any law that you don't agree with.
Objection. Move to strike the statement.
Sustain.
Objection.
I will strike from the record the last statement made by the defendant. The jury will just.
Darrell's last-ditch effort at escaping responsibility for his actions is by attempting to introduce the idea of jury nullification, even when he is told explicitly by the judge that it's prohibited. To briefly explain, jury nullification is when the jury knows that a defendant is 100% guilty, but collectively decides to take a stance on the law itself by coming to a decision of not guilty. And this is a highly debated concept in the legal world. It's not sure whether it's a right or something that can be misconstrued to undermine the power of the legal system itself. It was used in the South during times of lynch mobs when a jury might have known that the defendant was guilty but didn't agree with the law to which they were being prosecuted by, and they would vote not guilty regardless. Now, the opposite can be true too. A jury can find a defendant guilty despite there not being evidence beyond a proof of reasonable doubt. And the jury cannot be punished for reaching whichever determination they do. Technically, a jury cannot make the wrong decision. Jury nullification is something that can prevent you from serving on a jury, and in certain circumstances, it can even lead to you being arrested. But for somebody in Brooks's position, what does he really have to lose by bringing it up? Absolutely nothing. But what does he have to gain? Quite a lot, actually. It was found that juries who are told about the idea of jury nullification tend to hold a lot less weight in evidence that is presented, and it can allow sympathy for the defendant to kind of cloud their judgment. In my opinion, one of the biggest issues is that Brooks just isn't a sympathy-inducing person. He is generally unlikable as a result of his rude comments and his crass behavior. It's a huge reason why I think he should have just sat quietly and had an attorney represent him.
His position is that he should be able to tell the jury to disregard the law and do whatever they want. That is not a true statement of the law. So she warned him ahead of time that he didn't have the right to say that. He said, I'm going to do it anyway. Then he stands up, and this is his closing argument. He is doing that. The prosecutor objects and says, misstatement of the law. The judge immediately sustains it. Not only does she sustain it, she strikes it, meaning she will later tell the jury, if I struck something, you're not allowed to consider it. So it's hard to unring the bell. I mean, the jury has heard him make that argument, but the judge is making sure that they know that they should reject it. I want to say parenthetically here that while it is customary and in fact very normal to make objections during witness testimony, such as irrelevant, hearsay, lack of foundation, asked and answered, it is really unusual to make objections during either opening statements or closing arguments. There is a lot of latitude granted by courts when you are making an opening statement, and especially a closing argument, to pretty much say whatever you want to say. Now, not anything that you want to say, but pretty much, like you can just kind of argue lots and lots of different things. If you have a bunch of spaghetti and you want to throw it against the wall of justice and see what sticks, the closing argument is the time to do that. However, there are exceptions, and one of the exceptions is trying to mislead the jury. Like, tell them that they have a right to nullify the law when they don't have that.
If you are allowed to represent yourself in this case, sir, you will not have attorneys assisting you.
I think I will probably be better served representing myself.
One of the rare cases when a pro se defendant in a homicide trial was acquitted is that of Hassan Bennett. He was arrested at 23 years old, convicted in a Pennsylvania courthouse of second-degree murder, and sentenced to serve life in prison for crimes that he did not commit. Hassan spent 13 years in prison until he was granted a retrial. Bennett did not budge on the thought of being his own attorney for a second time. His time in prison must have assisted him in his defense, though, because in a remarkable twist, he was found not guilty after only 81 minutes of deliberation. Hassan's particular case demonstrates that sometimes the legal system works and sometimes it does not. But it is never, never, never a bad idea to have an attorney represent you. Darrell Brooks, being a narcissist, believed that he was smarter than the prosecution. He truly thought that he would sway the jury with his sovereign citizen philosophy. There was perhaps one instance in which Darrell Brooks actually made a legal argument that the judge sided with him on. This was pertaining to an exhibit in which Erica could be heard discussing prior incidents where Brooks attempted to run her over. Now, this case, because it was still open, was not allowed to be brought up during trial. And even after the prosecution offered to redact that section of audio, the judge refused. Brooks took this as a victory, but lacked the understanding in the long run that it was really trivial. The amount of evidence that was stacked against him was just insurmountable compared to this one little fact. Brooks was adamant about representing himself, yet there were several times that he complained about having trouble understanding, and he also whined about inaccessibility to resources, including supporting counsel. And this is all things that were addressed during pretrial proceedings. They were all terms that he agreed to when he waived his right When people don't understand something, they can react defensively to it, which is what Brooks appears to do, even when the judge tries to offer him an explanation. Brooks didn't understand the concept of hearsay. He attempted to elicit hearsay and double hearsay testimony from witnesses multiple times. And because Brooks is unfamiliar with police procedure, there were questions that he asked of the officers that only served to make him seem stupid, for lack of a better word. An example is when he created an issue about an officer testifying during work hours as if it influenced his testimony in any way. Brooks repeatedly pushed an inference that witnesses may have been influenced by social media or news reports, despite some of them not even testifying to identifying him. Darrell makes points that have absolutely no significance, and he lacks basic courtroom etiquette and manners. This is an extremely important aspect of why you should always have legal representation. Although a jury is not supposed to consider certain elements in their decisions, it's nearly impossible to believe that we as human beings are not going to be swayed by our past experiences on some level. When polled after trials, jurors have revealed some of these mitigating factors to be as inconsequential as the way someone chews gum to their tone of voice. Again, it's not just how you say things, it's also what you're saying that could tie your own noose in trial. Brooks is completely uneducated on the process of crime scene investigation and asks questions of people like the medical examiner that will only instill more support for the state. He attempts to imply that the injuries were more severe on the victims because of their age. And the medical examiner explained that the injuries would be serious regardless of age. This is a hugely damning factor to have a medical examiner admit on the stand. Not knowing when to keep his mouth shut and not preparing witnesses properly opened the door for the prosecution to discuss things that were previously not permitted. A wonderful illustration of this would be when Daniel Ryder was on the stand, and Darrell Brooks kind of laid the foundation for the state to ask about a voicemail that Don Brooks had left on Ryder's phone. Regardless of Brooks's repeated objections, it was allowed to be played, proving that the state's story just had even more credibility. An actual attorney would not ask anything that they do not already know the answer to, because they don't want to chance something being said that could grant the state an opportunity to now introduce evidence that was not permissible prior. In a legal setting, it is highly important for an attorney to possess the ability to control their emotions. It's an enormous part of why you should deeply reconsider having representation in any circumstance. It's not easy to separate yourself from a case where you are the defendant. Representing yourself can be counterproductive to your own defense, like discussed previously. Brooks's questioning of Erica Patterson was repulsive, regardless of where you stand. He has abused her on countless occasions, and he stood there and attempted to exert control over her in that courtroom. Even when Darrell Brooks cross-examined Detective Carpenter, it was evident that he was on this power trip, which is not a good look to a jury. Detectives Carpenter and Casey were truly trolls, and I am totally here for it. Their passive statements found their way in right under Brooks's skin. It was to such an extent that it was impossible for him to control himself. He showed how disrespectful, aggressive, and just truly disgusting he can be when things are not going his way. And again, it is not an impression you want to leave upon the jury. Honestly, if I went through every time Brooks made an amateur mistake, I would probably be here forever. It ranged from just complete unpreparedness to questioning witnesses on irrelevant questions, things that he just had absolutely no reason to ask or just should not have asked, period. He attempted to enter evidence improperly. He was flabbergasted when he was expected to behave like an attorney, and he just couldn't understand how to raise a proper objection. He plays these semantic games and insinuates that the victims are either fabricating or exaggerating their injuries, and even insists that the prosecution has coached his defense witnesses. I think the absolute worst part was when he asked the medical examiner if she knew why the Sparks family took their son off of life support, as if he had any right to that information. The idea that he would even raise that in an argument is repulsive on every single page. Darrell Brooks is the reason the entire legal field hates pro se litigants. Judge Darrow took the words from my mouth. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. As a brief side note, Darrell Brooks's entire closing statement is the exact reason that one should never self-represent in a criminal case. I could do an entire episode on simply this closing statement.
I've said this a million times, but trials are not about what actually happened. They are about what is provable. Some things can be admitted into evidence and some things cannot. And lawsuits are about admissible evidence. They're not about just everything out there in the world or whatever you can imagine. There are strict rules which provide the framework for what can come in front of a jury. And also, if it's a bench trial, what can come in front of a judge. The idea that you would say in your closing argument that I want you to have all knowledge is complete and utter nonsense. Like, it's idiotic. A jury's job is to evaluate the evidence. The evidence, that limited universe of facts which came into the courtroom and was presented as evidence, not everything else in the world. Merely evidence, and then to apply the law to it, not the non-law. So in his closing argument, he's violated like two very, very, very fundamental aspects of what a trial is.
From opening to closing statements, the prosecution made a profound impact on the jury. They told a story about the incident using evidence. They used maps and videos and familiarized the jury with the facts of the case, even allowing them to inspect the murder weapon itself. The prosecution was aware when they were presenting a barrage of exhibits and made suggestions to the jury that they maintain thorough notes in case they had any questions later. The incredible witness testimony sealed the deal. They did such an amazing job at preparing them for not only direct but cross-examination. This case couldn't have been more well executed in my unprofessional opinion. They even laid out the grounds as to who qualified for a victim, and I'm sure this got extremely confusing, and there were even some victims that got missed during trial because 5 different hospitals received patients. The parameters that included a victim in this case required one to have had received treatment from a hospital. You had to have been in the street at the time the incident occurred, and you had to have been directly impacted by the SUV. Even narrowing all of the victims down with these restrictions, there were over 60 people. Sue Opper spoke some really powerful words during her closing statement. She said, quote, "Actions define a person. You can stand there with a Bible and profess to be the best man you can be, but your intent is known, Mr. Brooks. It doesn't have to be guessed. You need to look in the mirror, sir. You are a murderer. There are 68 victims in this case, and that is not an accident. End quote. I don't want to dwell too much on the state's solid case in this section because I feel like it's definitely been proven throughout the video. I just wanted to highlight those specific things.
Mr. Brooks, ask your next question.
I'm gonna get to it.
Thank you. In
How
my
am I
opinion,
supposed?
you're attempting to delay. So
No,
let's
I'm not.
keep
I'm
going.
not attempting to delay nothing. You want to come check the boxes yourself? You always trying to pull some fast maneuvers.
Mr. Brooks,
And Miss Judge, Your Honor,
we're going to get through these witnesses.
and I'm not stopping you
Through
from
your
doing that.
behavior, you're not going to delay these proceedings today.
I'm not trying to
We're gonna
delay the
continue.
proceedings, so I wish you would stop being incorrect on the record and saying what I'm trying to do if you don't know that. You don't know
Mr.
what
Brooks,
I'm trying to
reading
do.
the jury out. I'm not going to argue with you.
Then don't. Because I'm not arguing with you either. I'm stating
You're
facts.
raising your voice. It's
Because
very
I'm tired of you always
and it's
making a
yelling
record.
at me.
You're making a record of me trying to look bad. I know what you're trying to do. It's not going to work.
I'm making a record of what's accurately
You're
being
making
done
a
in
record
the
of incorrect statements. That's what you're doing. You're not making a record of
Mr.
not
Brooks,
being
I'm
able.
advising you to be quiet because the jury's coming back out.
You're advising me to be quiet? Is you telling me to be quiet?
I'm advising you to be respectful when the
Are
jury
you
comes
telling
out.
me to be quiet or are you asking me?
I'm asking you and advising
Okay.
you.
Thank you for correcting that because don't nobody tell me what to do. I don't tell nobody else what to do.
Sir, I'd appreciate if your tone of voice would change.
I would appreciate if you would ask me. I'm a grown man with grown kids. Ain't nobody gonna talk to me like that. Nobody. I don't have a problem with doing what you ask me to do, not tell me. Just like when I asked you about subject matter jurisdiction that you have yet to prove on the record. Asking? We're telling. I'm assuming that's asking. I object to that, Your Honor.
I understand.
I
I've made my
object to that.
decision. I expect that you respect the decision, at least
No.
as we're not going to debate it further.
Yes.
What was the objection?
I mean, you already.
You have to speak up. I couldn't hear what you said.
I have a code, so I can't.
Mr. Brooks, was there an objection so I can rule on
Yeah,
it?
yes, there was
On
an
what
objection.
grounds?
I can't even remember now.
Well, if you were objecting on relevance, it's relevant. His answer may stand.
It wasn't relevant, so I'll tell you that.
Mr. Do you have any requests as it relates to the jury instructions? I'll unmute you for that answer.
I can't hear everything you're saying.
Break
Yeah,
down.
I'm still agitated. I ain't gonna stop being agitated. That ain't gonna stop. You sit up here and do everything you're doing and think God don't see what you're doing? You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Mr. Brooks, do you have any requests as it relates to the jury instructions?
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying. I can hear what you're saying.
You just told me you didn't. So which one is
Yeah, I
it?
got the headphones on. You can't see that?
What are your requests as it relates? What are your requests as it relates to the jury instructions, sir?
Man, don't try to come with this whole little sir. Now it's all this sir and all this. I'm gonna get where I'm going. Try to put it on this little act like you so worried about what's going on with me. You don't give a damn. Never did.
Mr. Brooks, you're being disrespectful again.
You've been being disrespectful. You've been being disrespectful. You don't gotta talk to me like that.
Do you have any requests
First of all,
related
what?
to the jury instructions, sir?
Man, yeah, I got requests. It ain't like they gonna be honored though, cause
As it
nothing
relates
I've
to
been
the
trying
jury
to get
instructions,
done.
sir, what are your...
I heard what the hell you said, man.
Well, Mr. Brooks, that was very disrespectful.
Yeah, and I've been getting disrespected since the beginning of this whole process. So welcome to the club.
Mr. Brooks, do you have any
I'm
requests?
tired of my rights being trampled on here too. I'm tired of it too.
Do you have any requests as it relates to the jury instructions?
Ain't nobody understand why I'm frustrated. How you gonna sit up there and make decisions based on what you think I said when I didn't give consent for you to do any such thing?
I think your headphones help you hear. The
They
muting
do.
is so that I don't have to hear the disruptions.
Okay, well, then why should I need to hear what
So
you
let
saying?
me be clear, sir. And you
don't
are
gotta
not.
be clear or nothing. I don't gotta listen to you.
I'm not
Or
going to
in
play
order.
this game with you, sir.
It's not no game. That's
It
what
was-
you don't
it
seem
is
to
a game
understand.
you. I believe that fully.
I don't care what you believe fully.
All right.
It's not a game.
We.
I don't take
I
this as a
asked-
game. That's what
Let me explain
nobody
this to you
that's what
once
nobody
again.
you don't gotta explain nothing to me.
Do you want?
That's what you don't understand. You think
you
that
want
this
the
is a whole
opportunity
game
to
to me.
question?
This is not a game to me, Your Honor. Nothing about this is a joke.
I never
That's
said
what
it
y'all
was a
don't
joke.
understand.
But there's
And it's
some gamesmanship
unfair.
that's
It's
going on.
unfair and it's disrespectful to me that you think I would come in here purposely and treat this like a joke or a game.
I never said it was a
What
joke.
type of statement is that?
Mr.
Your life is not on the line. Mine is. And you think that I think this is funny?
I don't think it's funny whatsoever.
So
And I
I
understand.
think, Your Honor, with all due respect, I think you
So
should show
we're
some
gonna take
respect.
a 5. Has anyone made any promises to you to influence your decision?
So if you can hear me, I don't hear everything you saying, and you know I don't hear everything you saying. So cut the crap.
Mr. Brooks has interrupted with very disrespectful words at this moment. I believe that he is feigning his inability to hear and that he's done so throughout this case. There's absolutely no indication. He puts the headphones on when he wants. He takes them off when he wants to. While in this courtroom, he hasn't had them on. He's only used them while in the other courtroom. But again, I've confirmed multiple times that the audio is loud and clear. And his statements that he can't hear, his statements that when I mute his audio, that it mutes his audio, are simply false. Mr. Brooks, have you made...
Am I still unmuted?
You are, sir. And I'll make a record that per the lieutenant over in the other courtroom, the volume is 2 to 3 times louder than it is in this courtroom.
You need to stop making false records saying that I said I can't hear you at all. I said I have trouble hearing you when I'm over here.
The state can do what they want. I swear it gets fixed the whole case.
Yes.
Let's see what y'all
Just
trying
one?
to do.
Nada más una cirugía.
Trying to get here.
Dos. Two.
That's not gonna work either.
Mr. Brooks, you are advised to stop with the commentary.
No, I'm gonna say what I want.
You
to say.
called this witness.
All right.
What you doing is judicial misconduct. Judicial misconduct. But you don't want the jury to hear the truth. That's not fair to the jury. They have a right to hear everything. Not finna sit here and let you fix the trial because you don't want to tell the truth to the jury.
Mr. Brooks, please stop.
No, ain't no please.
You are
nothing.
being disruptive.
Ain't
You
no
are being
please, nigga.
disrespectful.
You always
The
gonna
witness
find
may
some
step
reason to
down.
say somebody's being disruptive because they want the truth to be out there. Man, quit it. You supposed to be the
Mr.
judge.
Brooks, I'm advising you that continued interruptions will result in you forfeiting your right to be present
and
in this courtroom.
under what law and
during
fact can you do that?
Illinois versus Allen.
Okay,
sir.
but the fourth option that you made up seems almost as if you're recalling what you want to recall and purposely not. recalling
Objection.
what you don't.
Badgering the witness.
Yes, sustained. You do not have to answer that, and you are warned. You may not badger or argue with this witness. Next question.
Badger or argue. What do you mean?
Next question.
What do you mean?
Don't intimidate the witness is what I mean.
How am I intimidating the witness?
Badgering the witness by eye rolling, by pursing your lips, by making facial movements regarding
That's
her
Does she
answers
feel intimidated?
is badgering the witness.
Are you kidding me?
Under 90611, please ask your next question.
You can't be serious right now. Intimidating the witness. What have I done to intimidate the witness?
The last question was badgering, which is a form can
But you
be.
said
Mr. Brooks, I've made my ruling under 90611. Please ask a question or I will stop the questioning.
How did I intimidate? I see the whole strategy here by the prosecution. I see right through it. Don't have any cross-examination, mainly because you've already schooled the people getting on the stand on how to answer certain things.
You said you wanted to raise a legal issue. What's the legal issue?
The legal issue is how is the state allowed to coach the people
You're
getting on the
assuming they
stand?
spoke to them and coached them.
It's obvious. I'm not stupid.
Well, I disagree with that, sir. Again, you could ask
All of a
questions to
sudden-
lay a foundation
all of a sudden the
with
state
these
don't got,
witnesses.
all of a sudden, for the first time in trial, all of a sudden now they don't got no cross. That's clearly a rush to try to get through the case. Hurry up. We just gonna let these people go.
Well, this is argument.
Come on, man.
This is argument on your part,
I
sir.
see
It
through
is pure
I
commentary
just
at
want
this
that on
point.
the record. I see through it.
And your
Nice try,
see-through
but I see through it.
has absolutely no basis in
Well,
fact.
I know that's what's being done.
You
Come
could
on, man.
ask these questions. You could
Come on,
ask
man.
these
You got the right
witnesses
one.
certain questions, and you're
far,
not.
I'm far from an idiot.
They're.
I see what you people are trying to do. It's not right. It's not fair and it's not right.
Sir, ask your next question.
What's the point of me asking questions if I can't ask anything?
The jury will disregard his commentary
Can
that he
you
just
ask?
stated right now.
Objection to it being called an attack. I think that's a disparaging remark for the record. Man, y'all is ridiculous, man. You is something else. Wow. With all respect, Your Honor, I don't think he would have said that.
My concern was we were headed down that path.
Smart enough.
So
when did this video? When was this made a exhibit? Because I don't have it.
Objection, that's not a question for the witness, Your Honor.
That was a question. When
Sustained
was this
as the
video
form
made
of
an
a
exhibit?
question.
When was this video made an exhibit? That is a question.
I'm giving you the opportunity. It's called an offer of proof.
Okay,
I said I would
I'm
recall the
well
witness
aware-
if I
I'm well aware
determine.
what an offer of proof is.
Okay,
I'm well aware.
so make your offer of proof.
I don't need to. It's clear. It's very clear. I don't see anything funny either.
It's not funny, sir. It's a circular argument. Listen to me, please. I'm going to ask this question one more time.
Man,
It calls for
I don't
a
like
yes or
I don't
no.
like your tone and the way you're talking
It-
to me. I don't.
Mr.
I don't
Brooks?
appreciate it.
Sit down. I don't care if you don't like my
I'm
tone.
not gonna-
You've
I'm
been
not gonna
pushing
sit
my
down.
buttons all day throughout this entire
Okay, you've been
trial, and
pushing
I
my
have
buttons
showed
too?
the utmost of respect
No,
for
you
you,
haven't.
and I don't
Absolutely
appreciate
not.
you impugning the integrity of this court.
If that's
I
what you
don't.
want to call it, that's fine, but it's
Stop
not accurate.
talking.
What you mean stop talking?
I need to make a ruling. Okay,
Well,
I'm purposely not putting
let's
you in
talk
the
to-
other courtroom
Let's
right
talk to
now.
each other like adults then.
Mr.
Because
Brooks,
I've never told you to stop talking. Like, I don't even want to be in here that much longer. Just do what you got to do so I can get up out of here. I'm tired of being in the courtroom that has no integrity whatsoever. How can you even call yourself a
Mr.
judge?
Brooks, I need to make a record of
I
some
need to make a
things.
record too.
You don't
When
need
am
to-
I going to get the chance?
I don't want to dive too deep on what this Reddit thread is because ultimately it doesn't really matter to the case, but I felt it was still necessary to bring up. Towards the very end of trial, a Reddit post was emailed to the courthouse, and this Reddit post was actually about someone claiming to be a juror on the Darrell Brooks trial. When I read it, I immediately knew it was fake. It was a joke. You could tell just by the subject matter that was in it. It made reference to jurisdiction and things like that. It was extremely trolly. and I understand why it was taken seriously and investigated. It ended up turning out that it was edited overnight. The original poster had updated it to read that it was a joke. They didn't think it was going to get that out of hand. And there was no way that it could have been a jury member who wrote it, because at the time that they were updating this post, the jury did not have access to their phones or internet. Darrell latched onto this Reddit thread, though, and he wanted it to serve as the foundation for a mistrial, which was not going to happen. They were literally at the tail end of this trial, like day 14 or 15. There was no way they were going to declare a mistrial over something so menial. Some people suspected Darrell of writing the message, but this doesn't seem likely given his access to the internet. Who knows? There were others who felt like it was members of the Black Lives Matter movement who were attempting to raise some doubt in the case and throw it off. I really happen to think it was just a poorly timed joke and very bad taste.
Your Honor, seeing as that we've reached a verdict, is it necessary that I have these shock devices on my ankles?
Have you reached verdicts on all 76 counts?
Yes.
All right, I will read each one into the record. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information, dated this 26th day of October 2022, signed by the foreperson. All right, I will read each one into the record. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 2 of the information. Did the defendant commit first-degree intentional homicide while using a dangerous weapon? Answer, yes.
Burn in hell, you piece of shit.
Hey, you are to be removed right now. Find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty, 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 guilty.
You know, he's got his head hung right now, but he's not listening. We know this. He's not listening to a single word that anyone is saying. These defense mechanisms are so strong. And it's like, what are you protecting? Because there's nothing underneath this. Like, what Darrell's shown that he doesn't want to hear anything that doesn't fit his narrative. Like, he actively deflects, he fights, and at this point, he can't really do or say anything, but he would just move to one of his defense mechanisms, which is just to tune everything out until he's allowed to speak. And this guy has delusion written all over him. Delusional that he was going to be a famous rapper. Delusional that he could represent himself. Delusional that he could commit such a heinous crime and get away with it. This is like just a full-blown perpetual state of psychosis.
Just like with the Kyle Rittenhouse case, the Waukesha Parade tragedy brought out a plethora of online opinions. These were equally as polarizing, ranging from support to blame and somewhere off the charts crazy. People demanded answers. They wanted to know why Darrell Brooks was allowed to walk the streets, given his violent history. They wanted to know why specific politicians and media outlets refused to address the attack for what it was and take the same stance that they had in prior cases. It was being inferred, because Brooks is black, that he was not being held to the same standard as other domestic terrorists, regardless of his actions being worthy of the same label. Some used this to boost their belief that the news reserves their repulsion for white male offenders only. This led outraged assholes to tweet that the SUV was simply acting in self-defense, making light of the death of 6 people and the trauma, physically and emotionally, inflicted on an entire city. There was such little reporting done about the victims. Instead, it seemed like the focus was mainly on Brooks, creating clickbait articles that were either full of wrong information or had absolutely nothing to do with Darrell or the parade directly. People attempted to prove CIA ties and mistaken identity. There was even a meme of a man whose photo circulates notoriously in car attack cases. And it was picked up and run with. The public took it as truth. In my opinion, this wasn't about race. This wasn't about any specific group. This was nothing more than an emotionally stunted man-child who could not control his impulses and felt that he was more important than those he ran over. It's not any deeper than that. Attempting to tie his motives to any other belief only stands to remove the responsibility of these horrific actions from Darrell. It shifts the blame to someone or something else, and this only strengthens Darrell's delusion that he is a victim of circumstances and a broken system. During sentencing, victims are often given the chance to express their thoughts on how the guilty should be punished. For this case, 2 days were scheduled since there were so many people who were showing up to speak. The first day was set aside for the parade victims and family members of the victims, while the second was for anyone who wanted to speak on behalf of Brooks. Judge Darrow would briefly break and consider all statements, and then, on her reappearance, would make her recommended sentence. While there were countless stories, I highlighted just a few that I found extremely powerful, and I'm going to break up the clips with a bit of commentary as to not overwhelm you. I wanted to show not only the impact this crime had on the community, but the impact that the community had on the court as far as what Judge Darrow's final judgment would be.
I didn't watch all the trial, but the parts I saw showed Mr. Brooks had a lack of empathy for his victims or remorse for his actions. The only regrets he seemed to have is that he was caught and the impact on his own life. The only life he seems to value is his own. I don't believe that Mr. Brooks will think about me or any of his victims ever. The feeling is mutual. I really don't think much about him now, but when the prison door closes on this felon, I won't think about him again. I do hope Mr. Brooks will use the Bible for more than a courtroom prop. He may want to start with the basics that I know his family had taught him, thou shalt not kill, but then he might want to read Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Your Honor, I hope you give him the time to read and study the Bible. Mr. Brooks did everything he could to try to make the trial a circus. It is not a circus. It's not even about Mr. Brooks. Today, the court will hear what the trial is about, the victims.
My friend, myself, and the Waukesha Catholic community were asking parishioners and their families to participate in this parade. Imagine the guilt we must all bear for the rest of our lives.
It kills me to know that there are victims of this tragedy that carry more guilt than Darrell does. They do not deserve to bear the burden while Brooks sits there and makes mocking facial expressions and gestures.
Despite what you have done to my community, I forgive you. Forgiveness does not remove the need for justice. Justice must be served and you must go to prison. My prayer is that forgiveness will heal your wounds and the wounds for the city.
My joy disappeared. I felt guilty. I had no right to feel joy since my son and daughter were alive and others were not. I know some today may offer forgiveness, but for me, forgiveness is for accidents, for mistakes or poor choices that the offender expresses remorse for their actions. Darrell Brooks offers no remorse, but he did search for sympathy for himself. I cannot offer forgiveness. I will not.
In the next clip, the victim witness advocate actually reads a letter from a victim who did not want to face Darrell Brooks.
You don't know God, but you better start learning, because where you are going, you're going to need to start praying a lot. You don't deserve to see the light of day ever again. You should never be able to see your children again. It's too bad this state doesn't have the death penalty, because you would be put to the front of the line. I hope you rot in hell, have a miserable existence in prison, and that someone teaches you a true lesson in asking for forgiveness.
On November 21st, you killed my mother. And in this courtroom, I watched you run her down and her broken body slide across the concrete. This woman loved, and she was loved. You ran her down like she was nothing. And since that day, you have shown no remorse. You'd offered no explanation for your atrocities. It offends me that you're sitting here breathing while she is not. You are a monster. You deserve contempt and death. Sadly, with no death penalty in this state, I can only hope they lock you away someplace so deep the rats chew on your fingers at night. As for me, this will never be over until the day I'm pissing on your grave. I think it would be fair to say that for your crimes, even God hates you.
Perfectly said.
And Mr. Brooks, I hope as I read my statement, you continue to roll your eyes. I hope you continue to laugh and just show how bored and unmoved you are by all of this, because I think that's important. It's important for the world to see that evil can be a tangible, living, breathing thing. I think it's important for the world to see what human rot looks like. And to all the survivors, every time he puts his hand on that empty cavity where his heart should be, I hope you all smile, and I hope you take solace in the fact that today is our day. Today is for us. Today is so we can take our handful of dirt, throw it on his grave, and move on. Because that's what we all need, and that's what we deserve.
Here's your warning. The next statements are really hard to watch. They're truly heart-wrenching and exude such a magnitude of grief, it can be felt like an earthquake.
To my kids, Lee Owen was Nanny. And Nanny spoiled her grandkids every chance she got. On every birthday, she would call and sing happy birthday to their voicemail so they could hear it the first thing in the morning. She went on a tour of my son's summer camp. She danced in the same parades as my youngest daughter. She wanted my oldest daughter to use her car to learn how to drive so she could teach her like she taught me. And all of that has been ripped away. But the defendant's conscience is clear. To my dad, Lee Owen was the love of his life. They met when she was 16, and he taught her how to drive. From that point on, they stayed in each other's lives. And even though they divorced, she was still his best friend. They spent a lot of time together, and she was the only one who could get him out of the house. Now my dad has nightmares of her body flying through the air and shattering against concrete. But Mr. Brooks' conscience is clear. To my brother and I, Lee Owen was our mother. A mother who, even when she was struggling, was always there for us. She was supportive of us. She always told us how proud she was of us. Growing up, all my friends and my brother's friends knew they were welcomed at our house. When they were in trouble, having problems at home, or just had to get away, she always let them stay as long as they needed to. And for years, every time I came home from the Marine Corps, she got all those same friends together so I could see everybody and spend time with them. She was the one that made sure everyone got their Christmas lists out on time. She made the best eggnog I ever had. And she made my grandma's mac and cheese whenever we were together. She recently renewed her passport so she could visit my wife and I in Turkey and travel the world with us. She also couldn't wait to visit Machu Picchu with my brother. It was her dream trip. Out of all the places in the world, that was the one place she had to visit before she died. And now the best we can do is lay her ashes there. But Darrell Brooks' conscience is clear. And I believe him. Out of everything he said in this courtroom, I believe that is the one truth he told. I mean, how else could he make a witness look at each of his battered friends that he ran over and ask, how do you know who this is? Throughout her life, Lee Owen was a hard-working woman. That's why when she found herself on hard times, she was able to overcome them. Even though it took years, she dug herself out of a deep financial hole so she could live the life she wanted, the life she deserved. And she was in the middle of doing just that on the evening of November 21st, 2021. And I know this is corny and cliche to say, but Lee Owen wasn't 71 years old. She was 71 years young. She was one of the most active people I knew. She just didn't have it in her to sit still. She always had to be moving or doing something, and this often involved people. She was very social and loved being around those she cared about, and people loved her back. She had a knack for making you feel good about yourself without even trying, because she always found the good in people. Even when it was to her detriment, it never dissuaded her from helping people any way she could, without judgment, without demand for repayment or feeling she was owed anything. She did it because she knew it was the right thing to do, and it made her feel good. She accepted people for who they were and made people feel good about themselves. That is what the world lost, and you have the audacity to tell this court that your conscience is clear. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. There's not a human with a soul on this planet who could snuff that light out, who could steal Lee Owen from this world and have a clear conscience. And that is why you hear the term monster. That is why you hear the term demon. You know, I saw you that day. It was just after you ran over the Catholics. I saw you hanging out of the window, looking back with a smile of satisfaction on your face, laughing at an inside joke that at the time I didn't get, the punchline escaping me. I didn't get it when my mom didn't respond to my texts. I didn't get it when she didn't answer my phone calls. I didn't get it the first couple hours my brother spent looking for her. I didn't get it until my wife sent me a video of you running over children in the parade. That's when I got the punchline. And it hit me like your red SUV, Mr. Brooks. I saw a pure, unrepentant evil in your face that day, and it disgusts me that you are allowed to exist. And I know the answer to the question that everyone keeps asking. I know why you did this. You did this simply because you were not in a cage. That is what I find mind-boggling. And how dare anyone say the system failed him? The system failed every one of us whose only mistake was to bring their families in the vicinity of Mr. Brooks. That poor excuse for a man should not have been on the streets. That is the failure, period. But enough about him, because today is not about him. It's about us and what we lost. I lost my mom, Lee Owen, and I wasn't always a good son. I could be selfish sometimes. I could be mean. But no matter how angry or standoffish I got, she would bend over backwards for me, even when I didn't deserve it. And now I can never tell her I'm sorry. I can never tell her I should have been more grateful. I can never tell her how much I need her in my life. Yeah, shake your head. Shake your head. You know, because that is what you took from me. And there's nothing this court can do that would provide justice in my eyes. So all I ask is that you rot, and you rot slow.
There were too many nails hit squarely on the head in this speech. I have tried, like others, to understand how someone can listen to these families pour their hearts out and discuss their loss, yet sit there unmoved by a single word. I watched the trial and have rewatched these clips while editing, and every time I have bawled my eyes out because their pain is palpable. After watching hundreds of hours of this case, I have started to feel as though their personalities are crystal clear in my mind, and it's obvious that Brooks is an absolute sociopath.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Thank you for the opportunity that you're providing both to myself and to the rest of the families and acquaintances of the folks associated with this horrible case. My name is Michael Carlson, and I'm appearing here today both as an individual and a brother to one of the victims of November 21st. In my personal aspect, I wish I could as easily forget about Mr. Brooks as he has seemingly forgotten about himself. Every day since November 21st has been framed by what he did in my own life and our family's life. It is the reality I wake to. It is the reality I head to work to. It is the reality I confront as I try to fall asleep It's the reality I confront as I go about the things I do during the day, my attempts to work, attempts to manage a household and be present for my children, and maintaining any sort of notion of normalcy in our life. But all these actions are simply a pantomime, Mr. Brooks, to forget that my sister was so stupidly and so needlessly killed by you. Perhaps you can forget what you did, but I can't. November 21 looms as a ground zero day in the story of my life, as I know it does in the life of so many others. I'm not a victim. The victim is Tamara Durand, my sister. She can't appear here on her own behalf because she's dead. She died when Mr. Brooks killed her on November 21st. Because Tamara cannot be here to speak, I will speak for her. Darrell Brooks, you took my life. I wish you hadn't. I had people to live for, people who needed me. My parents who are aging, my children who need their mother to help them make sense of their worlds, to cheer them on, to help them into their adulthood, to become friends with them. I have my grandson who relies on me, his grandmother, as much as I relied upon my own grandmother as I was growing up. I had people who needed me to cheer them on, to have me bring goodwill to the hospital bed where they were, or their families in the waiting room, who needed the comfort and prayers I brought to them in their moments of pain. I have friends who need to hear from me and families that need my early morning phone calls. I had places I wanted to see and things I needed to do. The only saving grace is I didn't know what hit me. And who would have ever guessed? Who could ever believe it? It's no surprise to anyone who knew me. After you hit me in that car, I got back up and kept dancing. I hardly skipped a beat. I didn't know you, Mr. Brooks. If the picture were reversed, if you were the stranger in the street in pain, needing care or comfort, know that I would have helped you. I ran towards pain and I ran into danger in my life. All you had to do was ask, and you might have danced along with us. It was a parade, after all. We both died in vain on November 21st, Mr. Brooks. I died to life, and you now die to the world. We leave lives behind, family behind, children behind us. We both leave dreams, we leave choices, we leave successes, we leave failures behind us. I die to mine in an instant, you die to yours over countless days. May the God I'm with grant you the courage to confront what you've done and to remember your own name. It's the least you might do for all these that you've left behind us who can never forget. Mr. Brooks, I'd also like to acknowledge that over these last couple months, I've sent you a couple letters in prison, urging you to stand up, to be a man, to grow up, to accept accountability for what you've done. I also used those letters to share with you the love of the God that I believe in and that I know my sister Tamara believed in. I use those letters to share with you especially the story of the final act of Christ on the cross, where he is hanging between two murderers. And he turns to the one and he gives them forgiveness. I urge you to remember, Mr. Brooks, that there were two murderers on that day. One who mocked the holy living in God, and one who accepted accountability for who he was. Your Honor, I urge you to provide Mr. Brooks a lifetime in prison to please contemplate that story and to remember his name and to contemplate which side of Christ he wishes to hang on. A lifetime is a long time to think and to spout nonsense. And Mr. Brooks, I want you to take no comfort in your future here in this comic book cartoon world that you've created for yourself involving the flags and barcodes and birth certificates. This is all nonsense, the stuff of teenage boys on the internet. That's not why you're here today. That's not why we're here today. We're here today, and you are here today because you got in a car and instead of hitting the brakes, ran over children, elderly, and my sister, Tamara. I don't want you to live in the comfort of that delusion as you live there in the court, as you live there in the prison, convincing yourself that you're the victim of something, of some crazy internet conspiracy. You're not, Mr. Brooks. You're guilty only of your own actions on that day, actions that you had an infinite number of times to stop. Any number of times you could have just hit those brakes, turned the other direction.
I was glad to hear Brooks's soft-sit bullshit be called out. I'm glad that this man attempted to hold Darrell accountable for his role in the situation he created, because the damage he created is real. Innocent people had their lives drastically changed because of Brooks, and for him to blame anything else is simply rubbing salt in their wounds. His trial antics must have been extremely difficult for the victims to sit through silently, so I'm glad that they got their chance to voice their feelings.
My name is Marshall Sorensen, and I am son to a murdered mother, Virginia Sorensen. On a day that I was planning to put up a Christmas tree with my family, I received a call from my dad that would turn my whole family's world upside down. When I answered the phone, my dad told me something happened to your mother during the parade and she didn't make it. I said, "What do you mean she didn't make it?" My dad proceeded to tell me that she was killed. Of course, I didn't believe him at first, but when I hung up the phone, reality set in. As I wiped the tears from my eyes, I thought to myself how I was going to tell my two little girls, as they wait in the other room to put up the Christmas tree, that they will never see their grandma again. As a parent, one of the hardest things to endure is to see your family in pain. Witnessing my daughter's hearts get shattered into a million pieces in an instant that night, trying to understand what happened to their Grammy, is something I wish to this day I could make go away. I love my mom unconditionally, and so did my family. My mom would jump at the opportunities to spend time with my daughters. I was blessed with having that opportunity with my mom, but my girls were cheated out of that because of the acts of one evil person. Mr. Brooks, you had mentioned that you will never be able to get the chance to hold your grandchild. To that, I say good. Maybe then, while you're locked behind bars, you will experience a little bit of the pain that you inflicted on 6 families when you killed their loved ones during a Christmas parade. My family will never get the chance to hug my mom one last time and say goodbye because of your actions. You will never understand what you took from my family, and by your actions in court, you don't seem to care either. You murdered my mom, and for that reason, I'm asking the judge to sentence you to life in prison without parole. I continue to have a hard time understanding why such a loving person like my mom had her life ended in a tragic way. But I do have some peace knowing that she left this earth doing something she loved. I encourage people now, after a year, that if someone asks you how my mom died, Virginia Sorensen, that you respond with, "Let me tell you how she lived," because that is what made her so special to so many people.
I'm David Sorensen, Virginia Sorensen's husband of 56 years, and I'm wearing this Dancing Granny sweatshirt in her memory. Although I have very specific thoughts on how I and the parade families would want revenge on the convicted for what he did, I hand over his fate now to God. So I will let God determine the revenge I ask for, be it a week, a month, a year, a lifetime. I think it's fair to say the convicted is an evil animal, and I hope that God's wrath falls upon him. It actually started before the trial did, because he took away his own God-given name. He didn't want to be known by his name. I refuse to accept him as a person that deserves compassion or mercy. I too regret Wisconsin does not have the death penalty, because if someone ever deserved it, the convicted most certainly does. Life in prison is too kind. That Bible on your table will not do you any good for where you will end up. I have struggled this past year with Jenny's loss. It was to be her last parade. She was going to retire. I will continue to struggle with the loss. I am lucky to have family to care for me and wrap me in love so that I can start to glue together the shattered life I now have. I know Jenny probably saved our two granddaughters, who sit behind me, their lives by carrying the banner that day in their place, and I thank God for that. The life that Jenny and I built over 56 years of marriage was forever altered nearly a year ago. I will carry on in this new life with help from my family and friends. The life I was once able to share with Jenny is gone, but it has strengthened my family's closeness and in a way made us stronger for the great challenges we have ahead of us. I feel sorry she will not be able to hold a great-grandchild or see all of her grandchildren be successful in life, but I pray to her and know she is watching over us. My Christian faith and church have helped me cope with my sadness and find hope and love over hate. My friends have lifted me up in their prayers. My family carries my burden with me. My dogs at home give me a small measure of comfort when I am in need. Angels will watch over all of us and give us strength. Now I want you to use your imagination a little bit. When it thunders, I imagine that Jackson is blasting a home run over the fence. When there is a rainbow, I will imagine the dancing grannies, Jenny, Tammy, Lee, and Bill, with them dancing along its lines. When there's a ray of sunshine poking through the clouds, I will imagine it is Jane, smiling down on us. When it snows like it did this morning, I will imagine God's love giving us a blanket and comfort. When I see a blue light, I see this community's commitment to help heal and support each other.
I wanted to try and end this section on a bit of a bright note and briefly discuss Pepper, the therapy dog. She was fully funded through donations and grants and assisted the victims in alleviating their anxiety and easing some of the stress associated with the courthouse. I'm a huge advocate for therapy dogs. I have a guide dog whose uncle is actually a therapy dog, and their work is 100% amazing. I know that while I worked on this video and cried, my boy was right by my side, licking my hand in an attempt to comfort me. I'm positive that Pepper did her job simply from the raving reviews that she received.
Pepper, who greeted us every time we came to the courthouse, she put a smile on everyone's face, brought a little humor, or a caring snuggle.
Especially my new furry friend, Pepper. Here's a thank you that nobody knows about. Thank you to J.J. Watt. He's a professional football player for the Arizona Cardinals, who gave this community money for funerals for the victims, 6 family funerals.
I wanted to notice J.J. Watt, who is a Waukesha native. He made it big in the NFL, but returned to his community in their time of need and provided financial relief for 6 funeral expenses. That is loving thy neighbor in full practice and truly respectable. Originally, Darrell Brooks claimed that he would have roughly 9 people speaking on his behalf. Only 3 showed up by Zoom. These 3 people included his mother, his grandmother, and a supposed best friend of his. I'm going to try and keep it fair, but get ready for a whole lot of blame shifting. It is extremely clear where Darrell Brooks gets his behavior from in the next few clips.
Mental illness affects everyone. It destroys lives, families, and hurts society. For far too long, it's been a dirty little secret in families that no one wants to talk about. Mental illness is the elephant in the room that so many pretend it's not there. People who suffer from it are often shunned by families and friends, rejected by society, and made fun of, the subject of bad jokes, ridiculed, and judged on YouTube, podcasts, Facebook, and other media posts. There are the forgotten ones, and viewed by many of not having a place in society. It is no fault of their own that they have become ill and began to change from the person we all knew. Once viewed as fun, loving, and kind, are now the outcasts of society. We say what's wrong with society? They're idiots, unfit. They need to be disposed of, thrown out with the rest of the trash. They serve no purpose. The same my brother's keeper doesn't apply to them. And the Bible, in the book of Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, it says, let each of you not look only to his own interests, but also the interests of others. Mental illness caused them to do the unthinkable. They must be punished. Yes, I agree, there should be some accountability for their actions. But we also must render help. What good is punishment without correction to prevent the act from happening again?
No one is judging Darrell Brooks because he is supposedly mentally ill. We're all judging him because he's an asshole whose name deserves to be dragged through the dirt. I really don't know what generation this woman is living in where she is believing that mental health is still unbelievably stigmatized. We have come a long way in diagnosing and treating it and understanding it in general as a society. Let me start with the last thing she said. What good is punishment without correction to prevent the act from happening again? I would ask Dawn Woods if this is something that she implemented in her parenting of her son. If so, then why is he not able to understand the consequences of his actions at 40 years old? Darrell is not a child. He is not just learning right from wrong. It's not the state's job to instill lessons that she should have taught him when he was young. If she did attempt to correct this behavior, clearly it didn't work. So what does she think that the state is going to do that she could not? I mentioned it is legal for a family member to have someone committed for mental health reasons in Wisconsin. So why did she not take this step in ensuring that he was taking his medication? Why does Darrell Brooks's repeated shitty decisions now become the fault of others because they refuse to take action? It's because rather than take action, she has always just made excuses. It's not like this is Darrell Brooks's first rodeo. To generalize all mentally ill people as, quote, forgotten members of society, end quote, is such a disservice to those who have worked their ass off, either in therapy or through self-affirmation, to become a better person and a productive person. To write off Brooks's bullshit as simply being sick proves my point about this being just an excuse to save face rather than an actual cry for help. All it is a ploy to pull sympathy from the judge. This is something that he has done previously. Dawn Woods could have helped her son before he was ever in the custody of the state.
I believe lawmakers and society as a whole need to recognize mental illness. Mental illness cannot be eradicated with prison bars. Mental illness is going to always be there. It's invasive. With treatment and therapy, medication, and hospitals and institutions that specialize in the treatment of mental illness, it can be controlled. What else can we do as a society to help those who suffer from mental illness? How about showing a little compassion, empathy, and some understanding? Families need to advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves or who struggle to understand what's happening to them. Lawmakers should support by providing resources to individuals so they can get the help they need. Now, I've been dealing with mental illness for over 30 some odd years, and here's my take on it. And I think I have a little insight on it. From the surface, I believe that treatments need to be offered. I believe that if treatment is offered early, when the signs of mental illness first shows, and it's addressed and stayed on top of, instead of let people lagger and fall through the cracks, just maybe there would be less court cases and less people crying because their loved ones was hurt.
And with that sentence, I am completely done listening to anything else that comes from this woman's mouth. No sympathy for the people her son murdered. No sympathy for the people whose lives he changed forever. It's all about them. Selfishness has a deep root in this family tree.
For the record, my name is Dr. Mary Darlene Edwards, and I am not the wicked grandmother of the West. I am the grandmother of Darrell Brooks Jr., and I asked to be here today for two reasons. First of all, from the bottom of my heart, I want to offer my sincere apologies to those who have been hurt so badly by what has happened here, this tragedy that has been caused by my grandson. I want to also apologize to the family of the little boy. I understand their name is Sparks. And to all of those whose lives have been damaged by this overwhelming tragedy.
My first impression screams narcissist. There are giant letters spelling out her name over what appears to be framed certificates. Her introduction, just so much of her shouts self-centeredness, and it becomes more evident where Brooks gets his flawed personality from. To be fair, she did have the common sense to apologize to the families.
As a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I want to give the family and those who've been hurt so badly the scripture, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And I say this, please know that it's my prayer that my grandson will sincerely and humbly apologize and ask all of you and God for forgiveness for this horrible, terrible deed. Some of you have said that you will never forgive him. Please do not be like the man who drank the poison and hoped his enemy would die. Unforgiveness is a terrible disease, just like mental illness is. Truly, there have been many losses because of this tragedy. Darrell's mother has lost a son. I've lost a grandson. Darrell's children have lost a father, and Darrell has lost his mind and his life in the outside world.
Do I need to say more? The language she uses makes my blood boil.
Darrell's behavior, including his voice, should get the attention of the powers that be, both near and far. Darrell has suffered from bipolar since the age of 12, and it was that disorder that caused him to drive through that crowd.
This could be a first for me to tell an 8-year-old this, but with all due respect, Grandma Brooks, go fuck yourself.
Before I close, I just want to share with you some facts with regard to mental illness. And I got this from the government's mental health website. There's a myth that said mental health problems don't affect me. Many people don't feel like it affects them. That's a myth. It affects everyone. It's a common problem. In 2020, and listen to this, 1 in 5 American adults experience a mental health issue. 1 in 6 young people experience a major depression episode. 1 in 20 Americans lived with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disease, or major depression. Suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States. In fact, it was the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 24. It accounted for the loss of more than 45,979 Americans in 2020. That's nearly double the number of lives lost to homicide.
Directing the conversation back to herself. I am 80 years old. I am an ordained minister. Who cares? Your grandson is still a fucking degenerate who ended the lives of 6 people who did not deserve to die. He is not some victim of mental illness left to suffer by the broken system. He is a rotten person to his core, and there is no solution for shitty people. He doesn't belong in society. And if he failed to take advantages of the resources available to him, and the family refused to interfere in the situation, knowing he was unable to care for himself as they claim, they are just as culpable in this tragedy, because they failed too. We all have a responsibility to our community to follow the agreed upon rules. If you're incapable of doing that, then you belong somewhere where you can learn to do so, or kindly fuck off. Sorry, I'm not trying to get angry, but watching these 2 women speak for just a few minutes has enraged me. I honestly couldn't imagine what a childhood surrounded by them would be like. I pray that people do their research before attending any mental health clinic held by this woman, because she has probably done more harm than good for the citizens of Detroit. I'm done with this one. Did she really just minimize murder by comparing it to suicide? Well then, Mary, it's a damn shame that Darrell didn't take his own life instead of 6 others. When Darrell was given the opportunity to speak on his behalf, it wasn't any better. He spoke for 2 hours, making circular arguments and just talking about himself. He made 1 backhanded apology. I wasn't going to play all 2 hours of this, so I picked out some of the most outrageous parts, in my opinion.
6 of these counts that you have been convicted of are intentional homicide charges. The options for the court are very limited. Life without the possibility of extended supervision. Life with the possibility of extended supervision as early as 20 years, that's the statute. And third, anything in between. And then lastly, related to that, there's an enhancer of 5 years for each count based upon the jury answering that special verdict question, did you commit the offense of intentional homicide by using a dangerous weapon? Mr. Brooks, what do you think this court should do? as far as the sentences are concerned with all of these convictions?
Honestly, Your Honor, I don't want this to be taken out of context. There's issues with me attempting to answer that. And here's why. I'm still confused on the true nature and cause of the charges. I don't understand them. I believe a decision was already made before we even got here. I believe God has a plan for everything, and it's about doing the best you can inside of God's will. What he sees fit to do, we can't stand in the way of it. No matter how much we wish we could, we can't. Long before November 21st, 2021, long before that day, I was struggling. It has not been easy. I just want to be helped. A lot of reference yesterday was made about death. I do not fear death. Not one bit. I do not fear death because I'm in Christ. Whether we believe it or not, at some point, we all have a date. I'm 1,000,000% confident in where I'm going when this is all over. 1,000,000% confident. Regardless of what anyone thinks or says, I'm 1,000,000% confident in where I'm going. But this needs to be said. What happened on November 21st, 2021 was not an attack. It was not planned, plotted. This was not an attack. This was not an intentional act. No matter how many times you say it over and over, it was not. When you constantly hear that perpetuated, constantly pushed, constantly pushed, constantly pushed, it's repetitive at this point. I've moved past the actual tragedy of the day of November 21st, 2021, but I have not moved past uplifting this community in prayer, and I will continue to do that until it's my time to pass on. I won't stop uplifting the communities in prayer, the victims, the families. Regardless of how anyone feels, I will continue to pray for them, because that's what I want my heart to reflect. But that doesn't mean that
my life has to continue to be defined by that. I refuse to continue to live at that time because that time is past. I can't and I refuse to live the rest of my life trying to please other people. Man, I should have, why didn't I, what does it matter now? How many times can I pound my fist against something and say, why, how could this, what? How many times before you just like have to move forward? I want each and every victim in this incident, family members, those who lost loved ones, those who are still healing. I want you to know that no matter how you felt during this year, no matter how you felt yesterday, I want everyone to know, also the community of Waukesha, I want you to know that not only am I sorry for what happened, I'm sorry that you could not see what's truly in my heart, that you cannot see the remorse that I have, that you cannot listen to all the phone calls that I've made to my family, that you cannot hear all the prayers that I've said in my cell, that you cannot count all the tears that I've dropped in this year. I apologize for not showing people what they wanted to see. Everyone has to make their own peace with God, and that's what I've done. Regardless to what people think, I've done it.
Do you think you should spend the rest of your life in prison without ever seeing freedom? Should these counts run consecutive or concurrent?
I can't live a million years. I feel like I should be able to go somewhere where I can be helped, where I can be properly evaluated, where I can be properly medicated. If that is an extended period of a long time, at least I know that I'm getting what I need. Not what I want, what I need.
Judge Darrell was so moved after hearing about Darrell's childhood trauma, his struggles with mental health and drug addiction, that she decided to place him in a mental health facility and hope that he was able to get medication and the help that, no, she fucking did not. He is guilty as sin and deserves to spend the rest of his life rotting in fucking prison. And that's exactly where he's going. The fact that Darrell Brooks even thought that a mental facility was an option is delusion. Pure delusion.
Today I am tasked with sentencing Darrell Brooks for 76 counts related to a couple of moments in time. Moments that are tragic, moments that were frankly avoidable. My sentence here today is, the purposes of it are twofold. Really threefold if we think about the community. One, it is punishment. Two, protection of the community. And three, what I hope is justice and closure for the families and the community at large. The seriousness of the offense can be summed up, frankly, in one word, and that is attack. There is nothing, no other word that can best describe what happened on November 21 of 2021 than the word attack. The intentionality of the conduct is outstanding. The viciousness, the speed, the swerving from side to side at various points. This was not a case of whodunit. From the very beginning, from when this case was charged, it was clear who did this. Now, that is not to say that I prejudged this case. I did not. But after sitting through this trial, after watching the many videos, after listening to the testimony of the many, many dozens of witnesses, it is clear the state had overwhelming evidence of Mr. Brooks's guilt. What's also aggravated is his complete and utter lack of remorse. He spoke here today for 2 hours. One sentence, that's it. I'm sorry. No detail. 2 hours, one sentence. That is not an indication or a sign of someone who has empathy, who is sorry for what he has done. Do the mentally ill sometimes commit atrocious crimes? They do. This is not one of those situations. There are many times, good people do bad things, but there are times when evil people do bad things. There is no medication or treatment for a heart that is bent on evil. Child trauma, bipolar, indifference, physical abuse of a child, or even childhood trauma did not cause Darrell Brooks to commit the acts for which he will be sentenced here today. It is very clear to this court that he understands the difference between right and wrong, and that he simply chooses to ignore his conscience. He is fueled by anger and rage. Some people, unfortunately, choose a path of evil, and I think, Mr. Brooks, you are one of those such persons. I understand why his family might cling to that because of the difficulty in coming to grips with a loved one doing such heinous things. But for Mr. Brooks, it's nothing more than indifference, deflection, and outright denial of what he did and the impact that he has caused as a result of his heinous actions. The loss of life in this case is certainly one of the aggravating factors here today. The number of people injured, also an aggravating factor. The reach into the community, certainly palpable because this was a Christmas parade. I think it was a comment earlier either today or yesterday that this was not like one act where Mr. Brooks drove into a crowd of people. This was sustained driving from block to block to block to block, picking off people that were unsuspecting. 68, 69 times. Driving over people as if they were nothing more than speed bumps. No doubt, this is by far and away one of the most aggravated cases I've ever presided over. The sheer magnitude of the loss, the number of victims, the types of crimes for which the jury has convicted him. 6 counts of intentional homicide, 61 counts of first-degree recklessly endangering safety, 6 counts of hit and run, 2 counts of felony bail jumping, 1 count of misdemeanor battery. What's further aggravated is the fact that he was out on bond. He should have had no contact with Erica Patterson. But the rules mean nothing to Mr. Brooks. Nothing. When I say the rules don't matter to Mr. Brooks and court orders mean nothing, Mr. Brooks was in custody, and there are jail phone calls where he's berating Erica Patterson, encouraging her to recant, blaming her for what had happened, saying things on that phone call like everything is always everyone else's fault but yours, like you don't never do anything to cause shit, and the whole cause of this shit was something that you fucking did. You couldn't even keep your mouth shut after numerous people told you that shit. This ain't the place for you to be doing this shit, and you still ran your mouth. And I'm the one sitting in here facing all this time. Why in the hell would I just try to mow her down knowing I could kill her like that? Like, okay, I probably got a few screws loose, but I ain't hardly no goddamn fool. You didn't put a cent on my bail. Why should someone else have to pay for some shit you caused? Nah, I didn't try to do anything, because if I tried to do something, you wouldn't be on the phone now. That's what you're not realizing. If I really tried to do something, you wouldn't be on the phone now. That is the rage and the anger that Mr. Brooks had on November 21 of 2021. Frankly, Mr. Brooks, no one is safe from you. This community can only be safe if you are behind bars for the rest of your life. The actions of Darrell Brooks demand punishment. The community is not safe from your violent and criminal conduct unless you are in custody. You left a path of destruction, chaos, death, injury, confusion, and panic as you drove 7 or so blocks through the Christmas parade, never once stopping or seemingly caring about the wake of carnage that you left. On counts 1 through 6, this court is imposing a life sentence without the possibility or eligibility for extended supervision consecutive to one another. 1 life sentence for Virginia Sorensen. 1 life sentence for Leanna Owen. 1 life sentence for Tamara Durand. 1 life sentence for Jane Kulik. 1 life sentence for Bill Hospel. And 1 life sentence for Jackson Sparks. To order anything other than what I have done, sir, would be to unduly depreciate the seriousness of these offenses. It is needed, although largely symbolic, given the number of years that I have imposed here today, because frankly, you deserve it. I know it's symbolic, but it needs to hold you accountable in a very real and tangible way. Does the state believe I've overlooked anything here today?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
This now concludes this hearing and this case. We are now off the record.
You get minimal time to reflect in a place like this.
On the bright side, Darrell now has time to reflect on who the plaintiff is in his case and whether the state of Wisconsin really exists.
So seeing as how you sat with the prosecution for the entirety of this matter, it would be fair to assume that you know who the plaintiff is in this matter.
Yes, I do.
And who would the plaintiff be in this matter?
The state of Wisconsin.
Is that an entity or a living human being?
It's an entity.
How can an entity file a claim?
We sit at our prosecution table. We don't have a client at our table. But rest assured, we do represent someone. We represent the people of the state of Wisconsin. It's an entity. I can't bring it to the courtroom.
My name is Chris Owen, and I'm the plaintiff. I'm here on behalf of another plaintiff, my mother, Leanna Joy Owen. The reason none of the witnesses saw her in this courtroom is because she was executed by a child-killing sex offender. And we are both injured parties. My whole family is an injured party.
As Mr. Brooks droned on about where the plaintiff was in this case, who the plaintiff was in this case, you've already heard. There are many plaintiffs here. I'm here, right now. I've been here all along.
My name is Michael Carlson, and I'm appearing here today both as an individual and a brother to one of the victims of November 21st. I'm here today as well as a plaintiff joining a criminal complaint against Mr. Brooks with a claim against him for the damage that he has brought not only to Waukesha, but to my family. I'm a plaintiff, but I'm not a victim. The victim is Tamara Durand, my sister. She can't appear here on her own behalf because she's dead. She died when Mr. Brooks killed her on November 21st. Because Tamara cannot be here to speak, I will speak for her. Mr. Brooks, you asked the court to identify a plaintiff many times during the course of the trial. Here I am. I'm one of many. We, the people, have brought this case and these judgments against you, Mr. Brooks. They reflect our values as a people and are enacted through laws passed by our legislatures, enforced by our law enforcement, and administered through our courts. We, the people, find you guilty